Thanksgiving, yeah.
Can you believe this guy? This guy was nice enough to fly all the way here from New Mexico the day before Thanksgiving, and you're going to be on an airplane for Thanksgiving Day.
I will.
You're going to be back in time for dinner?
No. I'm going to get home late. My wife's going to have a meal for me, though. She's going to have a meal for me. I think you are worth it, and I think this planet is worth it, and I think the people of this world are worth this conversation, and that's why I felt it was important to have the conversation. You do a really great job at communicating some of the stuff that you talk about, and you cover a wide swath of topics from religion to spirituality to when I start diving down your YouTube channel, I can't stop. Can I tell you a story about that?
Yeah.
I was doing from home, I was doing a remote early morning talk show with a station in New York City, Commuter. I won't name the station. And the guy came on in the morning, and it was 6 a.m. for me. It was 8 a.m. for him. No good morning, welcome, Greg, thanks for doing the show or nothing. He came on, the first thing he said, he goes, why can't you stick with one topic like everybody else? And I thought it was a joke. I thought he was kidding. And I said, excuse me? He said, you're all over the map. Are you talking about planetary magnetics? You're talking about ancient civilizations, DNA, geomagnetic anomalies? What are you talking about? Then I knew he was serious. And I said, we do cover a lot of ground, but if you look closely, every one of those facets is just that, is a piece, one piece of a single picture, and it's the story of us. It's us and our relationship to our bodies and the world. So in a very real sense, I am sticking with one topic. It's just a big topic. And he said, let's go to station break, and he never came back.
What?
that was the end.
When was this?
It was a couple of years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, it was before COVID.
Well, that's wild.
Yeah, it was wild. So for a lot of people, we tend to zero in on one facet of our relationship to the world. Sometimes we get really hung up in that one facet because we're trained to think that way, Danny. We're trained to compartmentalize our world. We break the world down in the world of science. I'm trained as a scientist, and I was trained to think in terms of geology and biology and chemistry and physics. Yeah, we do that to make it comfortable for us to study the world. But the truth is the world doesn't know about those boundaries. And where you really begin to take a deep dive and a deeper understanding of what this world's about is when you cross those traditional boundaries that have separated the sciences in the past. I've lost a lot of credibility doing that. The minute that I started talking about spiritual traditions as a scientist, my credibility went right out the door. And it's okay. I'm not concerned about that because I'm not working in the corporations any longer. I don't need that kind of validation from my peers. Whatever time I have in this world, I think it's a healthy thing for us to do, to understand who we are and our potential, what it means to be a human in this world, because we are now on the cusp, on the precipice of giving our humanness away to technology. And that's what the new book's all about, and I think that's where we're going to go today. But we do cover a lot of ground to make that point, but it's really one topic, one conversation, and it's about us, Danny. And it's because we're absolutely not what we've been told, and we're so much more than we've ever been led to believe.
What motivated you and pushed you in this direction to be interested in this stuff in the first place and to become this sort of like public figure around all these different ideas?
It's two questions.
These crazy kind of, a lot of them are kind of like woo type things. I mean, you're on Ancient Aliens, right?
I've done History Channel, Discovery Channel
stuff like that, and they're known for being kind of like out there.
Well, let me tell you how that happens. You film, or I film for one Discovery Channel special, for example, or History or PBS Nova or something like that, and they take that footage from that particular segment and they will slice that up, and then you'll see sections of that ending up in other documentaries that they produce. I had no idea that I was going to be in those. Sometimes they slice it up in a way that looks like I'm supporting something that I actually don't support. And so we have to be very discerning about how the information is used.
So like, what is your background and how did you get into this stuff in the first place?
The easy questions first, You know, the way that question often comes about is, Greg, how did you make a quantum leap? What many people perceive as a quantum leap from the world of science and technology into what we're talking about now. And I guess for me, it was less of a leap and more of a progression. I mean, I was not a normal kid. Now looking back, I've been told that because I began studying ancient civilizations when I was 4 and 5 years old, and the solar system. And I was blessed. My mom supported me. She didn't understand everything I was doing, but she supported me and she believed in me, and that became important later in life. And I'll talk to you about that. But she memorized all the planets of the solar systems with me, and all the Egyptian kings, and all the names of the dinosaurs, and all of those things. So I knew I would probably be a scientist of some kind, but I didn't know exactly what that would look like. The flip side of that is, I'll just share with you, you're asking the question. I'm the product of a very dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic family. My father was the abuser. My mom, and I have a younger brother, 4 years younger. My mom and my brother and I got the bad end of that. And he left when I was 10. And our family went through, the remaining members of our family, 3 of us went through a really hard time. Financially, I mean, we were more than we lived in government subsidized housing. We were more than broke. I lied about my age. In an early age, went to work in a copper mill, making union wages in northern Missouri.
Wow. And
was really proud to be able to bring home a solid paycheck, to help our family. It was a union job. Worked 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. and then had to go to school the next morning. So it was, I learned to be a night person early, which has really helped me. It's really served me in my life. But the day my dad left, my mom didn't know exactly what that was going to mean, but she knew we were going to have a hard time. And in her wisdom, I say her past tense, I lost mom in 20 to 21 to COVID, December of 20. So in her wisdom of knowing that we were about to face some hard times, she gave me a book the day my dad left. And I know some of our viewers know this book very well. Maybe you do. It's called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. It is, it's a classic. It was, he was a Lebanese poet early in the 20th century. Every chapter is like a page and a half long, but it's just right to the point. And there was one chapter in that book that stuck with me to this very day. It's at the bottom of every email that I send out. And it is a mantra that I use every single day. And what he said is that work is love made visible. Work is love made visible. If you're going to do something in the world, if you say yes to it, then do it. And do it really, really well. Not from your fear of what happens if you don't, and not from the anger of doing something you don't want to do, but change your thinking to make that your love made visible. And that's a very different way of approaching work. I went to work in factories, surrounded by people that really hated what they were doing and did the minimal they could do to get by. So one of my first jobs, for example, I would load from midnight to 6 a.m. on this particular job. We would load box cars with 50-pound bags of Purina cat chow.
Oh, wow.
What it was. And those boxes to the trains would leave in the morning and, distribute those wherever they had to go. And man, I was surrounded with guys just hated that job. And my body's always been really important to me. And I said, if I do this right, love made visible, if I do this right, if I lift this just right, man, these 50-pound bags, it's a really good quad workout. And then if I shift that and lift upper body, man, I'm going to have a good upper body workout. I'm going to work 8 hours. I'm going to have a good workout. I'm going to get paid for it. And it's a very different way of thinking. But that ethic has been with me all of my life. And I had 2 experiences when I was 13. I went to my first rock concert, Jefferson Airplane. And the lead singer was a woman named Grace Slick, and I sat on the front row and I yelled at Grace Slick and told her I loved her, and she completely ignored me, completely blew me off. But here's what happened. In that room, there are 30,000 people in this is a small stadium. indoors. And I saw their souls being moved by what happened on that stage. Then we left, and people wanted to have that feeling again, but they couldn't get it without having something outside of themselves to replicate the experience. In that period of time, it was a vinyl album or an 8-track tape is what we were using. Not long after that, I had another opportunity to go to an outdoor stadium, 70,000 people, and there was a man named Billy Graham, an evangelist. So I wasn't so much into the message, but what I saw inspired me because he spoke to 70,000 people. And when they left, they didn't need anything outside of them to hold the feeling because his words touched them in just the right way, that something inside of them changed the way they felt about themselves, and they were different when they left. And I recognized that at 13 years old, and I said, there's got to be a way maybe to combine those. So I tried as a musician for a period of time early in my life and learned that I don't want to be a musician on the road. But the words became very, very powerful to me. And I knew that at an early age, in some way, I would use words to express my love made visible, my love for this world, my love for the people of this world. And especially now, we're going through a really difficult time. It's a convergence of many cycles of change. It doesn't last forever, but it's a rare and precious moment in the history of our planet when we have the opportunity to make choices and decisions that will forever determine our lives and our fate or our destiny. And it's our choice. Destiny of living our potential or our fate of succumbing to the darkness, to the fear that we have. And I recognize that at an early age. So my first degree is an earth scientist. I'm a degree geologist. It gave me a strong background in life sciences as well, biology. Actually, we're here in Florida. I went to school at FIT over in...
Oh, really?
At that time...
Is that in Orlando?
Well, the campus was in Melbourne, the main campus.
Melbourne.
Florida Institute of Technology. I was on a satellite campus in a little town called Jensen Beach. I don't know if you
I'm
know,
familiar with Jensen
just
Beach.
Outside of Stewart.
Okay, yeah.
And had a really strong background in math, physics, computer science, ocean sciences, marine geology, and then I transferred to terrestrial geology at Colorado State University. And that was where I finished in Denver, Colorado, and began working in the corporations at that time. And it was...
For a petroleum company?
Well, you can't make this stuff up. It was Phillips Petroleum is now ConocoPhillips. Same, companies merge.
Oh, wow.
But I happened to be there at just the right time when computers were coming into vogue. Computers at that time, they filled an entire room. They were big mag tape
What
systems.
year was that?
That was 78,
78, okay,
79.
wow.
Yeah. And I remember I'll tell you, I remember the first day I walked onto the job was when the Iranian hostage crisis began in 1979. So it sticks in my mind during that time. And they cut off the oil from the Middle East. And so the petroleum companies were trying to create, we had no reserves, and all of our oil was coming out of the Middle East. I don't know. I know you don't remember this. It was one of the few times our nation has actually rationed gasoline, and we were rationed to 10 gallons per vehicle per week. And this is the age of muscle cars.
That's crazy. In the 70s.
Yeah, 10 gallons didn't go very far. So I happened to be in the industry when they were using computers in ways they'd never used before. And I was a computer geologist. I was doing subsurface mapping of energy. In this case, it was in North Slope, Alaska, where we were working.
Trying to find that black gold.
Yeah, and so I learned a lot, self-taught in the computer. I could walk in to my company on a weekend, and because I had a security pass, I could go into a computer room, and there were all the computers of the day that were there, and all I had to do was read a manual and learn how to program these computers. There were CDCs and DEC and IBM. There was no Microsoft at that time. There were no Macintoshes, iOS at that time. Fortran was the main computer language.
Fortran?
Fortran, Fortran. It was Fortran 4 and then Fortran 77. So although I was an earth scientist with a strong background in math, physics, computer science, and ocean science, the computer science is where I really excelled in those jobs. And they wanted to transfer me to Saudi Arabia. I didn't want to go. And so I left and took the computer expertise and applied for a position with a company that explored the stars and the planets. It was called Martin Marietta Aerospace at that time. And they hired me, but it was during the Cold War, and said, well, you've got a job, but we need your expertise, this Cold War, on the defense side of the house.
Of course.
We want you to be a programmer. And I was a senior computer systems designer for Martin Marietta. And I'm saying this is going to be important in this conversation because it gave me insight into some of the most advanced technologies at that time, and even today. I mean, advanced laser systems, computer systems, radar systems, everything. And what I began to realize, because of my background in biology, is that all the stuff I was seeing built around us, as cool as it was, I have yet to this day to see any technology outside of us that doesn't mimic what we already do in the human body, except we do it better. And that's going to be important when we talk about where we're going here. So it was that path. It wasn't a quantum leap. It was a logical progression that I was developing my understanding of the technology and the science by day. By night, I was studying, and always have since I was 5 years old, ancient civilizations, ancient texts. Because I've always believed, and this really, and I don't talk about this a lot, but you asked me, so I'm happy to share it.
It's the most wonderful time of the year. Holidays on the house at DraftKings Casino. With this season's offerings, you'll unwrap everything you wished for, from table games and jackpots to a slot at the top of everyone's list. Jingle bells, power reels. Like I've said before, I love DraftKings Casino because I can just hop on whenever I have downtime and not have to worry about dodging potholes on the way to the Hard Rock or getting pestered by skimpy cocktail waitresses trying to give me drinks. And my in-laws haven't caught on yet, but I've been winning on their accounts too. It's a Merry Christmas for all. Have some fun this season, like me, with DraftKings. DraftKings is offering a warm welcome to new players with $100 instantly in casino credits with just a $10 wager. Plus, everyone can get in on the action with a holiday reward every week. So sign up with my code DannyJonesPod because the holiday cheer is here. Only on DraftKings Casino. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In Connecticut, help is available. For problems gambling, call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. 21 plus. Physically present in Connecticut, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia only. Void in Ontario. Eligibility restrictions apply. New customers only. Opt-in required. Casino credits are non-withdrawable and expire in 168 hours. Terms at casino.draftkings.com/promos. Again, sign up with code DannyJonesPod. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
The Cold War, the first Cold War, because we are now in a new Cold War, was probably one of the most frightening times in the history of our civilization. We came this far to doing the unthinkable, to releasing nuclear weapons on civilian populations. And if you look, there's no space in between my fingers because that's how close we came. The button was actually pushed twice during the Cold War years, and twice the technology failed for reasons that are still mysterious today. 1983 was the last time that the Soviet Union, former Soviet Union,
was that the story of the Russian guy that was in the submarine, and they told him to arm the nukes?
That was another story. But what happened was the tensions were so high, and the paranoia was so high. There was a flight. It was a Pan Am flight, the airline that used to be called Pan Am. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. The flight number was 007. All right. In the 60s and 70s, that was the code for a secret agent program, 007. You know, everybody used to joke about it. That was the flight number for this plane. It strayed, civilian craft strayed into Russian airspace. And the Russians, because they couldn't reach the plane, 007. They were sure it was a spy plane. They shot it down. Killed all the civilians. One of the civilians was an American congressman. So now they have just killed an American congressman during the Cold War. They thought that because they took out our congressman, we were going to retaliate. And because of that, they thought that they should preempt us. And that was when they pushed that button. That's how crazy this stuff is. And it didn't work. 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was a movie that came out. It was called The Fog of War. And the former Secretary of Defense was a man named Robert McNamara, who has since passed. And he was being interviewed. First time in Cuba since the missile crisis when he was Secretary of Defense. And the interviewer asked Fidel Castro. He was there with Castro. They were having a conversation through the translator. And the interviewer asked Castro, if you had had the nuclear missiles, would you have ever launched against America knowing that America would destroy your country? And he answered, and the translator translated that answer, and McNamara said, this must be a mistranslation. He said, ask him again. And he asked him again, and McNamara's face went white, and he left the room. And he came back because it was the first time during that interview that he learned that Cuba had, in fact, received the nuclear missiles and that Castro had, in fact, pushed the button, knowing that his nation would be destroyed. He was so angry after the Bay of Pigs invasion and all the stuff that happened around that, that he was willing to risk that, and the technology failed for some reason. So these are very frightening times, and it was within that context that I found myself working in this industry. I'll just tell you how, because it wasn't by choice. I didn't wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to go.
It's astonishing the level of technology we were able to develop and achieve. Like the technological progression that we were able to do during the Cold War is like unparalleled.
Wartime is typically what pushes the technology because we have unlimited funding and we have unlimited human resources, and they are given the license to push this tech as far as you can push it. It's an engineer's dream.
Yeah.
So it was within that context that I found myself in this industry, and I've always believed that if we know where to look and we know how to look, that somewhere in our past, those who have come before us left us the clue to give us the reason to think differently so that we would never have the kinds of wars again that we're having in the 20th century. And I felt like it was worth devoting a lifetime to hopefully gain some insight, maybe not the whole answer, but our ancestors left knowledge for us. Some of it we're only beginning to understand. Some of it is things that we've never seen before. It wasn't science in the disciplined way that we see science today, but it was knowledge in terms of us, our relationship to the world, and our own bodies. And so by night, I was doing that. And what ended up happening, I would give seminars on the weekends, and I was working in these corporate positions as a senior computer software designer. And one day, our supervisor came in, and it was all male, cubicles. It was Air Force. We were working with the Air Force on this stuff, and he'd come in and he'd have a big soggy cigar in his mouth that couldn't be lit indoors, but he had it there anyway, And he'd say, well, man, the good news is it's Friday, only 2 working days left until Monday. And we knew when we heard that, it meant we were all working overtime. And I said, I can't. I have a room full of 1,000 people waiting for a seminar they've already paid for. And I've already committed to that. And he said, son, you have to make a choice. Do you work for this company or are you working for those people? And that was my pivot point.
Oh, wow.
So I left the corporations not long. There were other things that were happening, but I left the corporations not long after that. Wow. And began doing full-time what I had been doing at nights and weekends, part-time, within the context of a very frightening time in the history of the world. We are now in another one of those frightening times where there are forces, organizations, and beings who are pushing us to destroy ourselves. It's not good. What's happening is not good for humans. And we're barreling down the path as I speak to you today. This is a very delicate, very fragile time in the history of our world. And that's why I think it's good to have the conversation that we're about to have. So that was a long answer to a short question, but it wasn't like I had some deep near-death experience or spiritual awakening. It was a logical progression. And I think the multidisciplinary background in so many sciences has given me the tools to stay on top of the new discoveries. I mean, discoveries, they are coming so fast right now. There are science journals. There's a journal named Science. There's another one named Nature.
Right.
Peer-reviewed scientific journals every 30 days. So many discoveries are coming out in between those releases that they can't keep up. So now they release weekly newsletters to keep us informed of the discoveries until the end of the month, the big journal comes out.
Right.
It's like the floodgates have been opened when we begin thinking about, everything from the macro, the edge of the universe, to below the quantum level, to understanding genetics and our capacities.
Yeah, it's the time during the Cold War, and especially surrounding like the Kennedy assassination and what was going on inside the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the total nuclear annihilation they wanted to plan, and Kennedy wanting to get in the way and pull everyone out of Vietnam, and how that led to essentially him getting assassinated and the whole cover up behind that. I mean, that is like that really showed, I think, more than ever that there is a deep rot within the United States and the people and the military industrial complex and the people that are behind the scenes.
So maybe this is how we're going to begin this conversation. How deep do you want to go?
As deep as you want to go. I'm ready to go.
What you're calling that deep rot is, and I agree with you, unless we recognize the context, it's very easy to get sucked into the drama of the individual rots, like a presidential election or like a war in Ukraine or whatever, financial collapse, banks collapse, So let me just begin, and you can't make this stuff up. I'm going to go back. I'm a student of ancient texts, as I mentioned, and when I was a kid, one of the big mysteries was the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, they were discovered, the first scrolls were discovered 1946-47 in Qumran. I know you've had experts on here that know way more than I do about this, so I apologize if I'm redundant to your viewers.
No, don't apologize.
I don't know exactly what he said, so let me just go over this. The scrolls were first found in a cave in Qumran, 46-47. There are 11 caves. Actually, they're still discovering them. They're still 2023. They just discovered more fragments of the scrolls. And
there's a lot of fakes too.
Another cave, but there are caves. They continue to excavate these caves. And they've found more. So you can't make this up. It was in cave number 1. So the first cave and the first vase that they found, and these are not little, bell jars. I mean, these are big clay vases.
They're bigger than this.
They're like this tall, and they were sealed with tar and pitch, and that's what kept the scrolls in the dry desert environment. In the first cave, the first scroll that was pulled, the first vase that was pulled out, and the first scroll that came out of that is the reason that so many of the scrolls, for 45 years, there was a legal battle not to release the translations into the public.
Really?
And it was not until the early 1990s. I was a member of something called BAR, Biblical Archaeology Society. A lot of people, I don't talk about it a lot because it doesn't come up, but it's relevant here. Herschel Shanks was the man that headed up the Biblical Archaeology Society, Archaeological Society, and he pushed and legally pushed to have the translations released. The Vatican was pushing back, and there was a lot of political pushback, and he very courageously pushed to have these released. What could possibly be in the scrolls that are over 2,500 years old that would warrant holding them from the public for 45 years? And the answer was in that first scroll. So I'm going to say this, and it will be the context for everything we're going to talk about for the rest of this conversation. That scroll spells out very clearly. It's called the War Scroll, 19 columns. And it spells out very clearly that we continue today, we are living an ancient battle that began with the first of our kind, the first human that emerged onto this earth 200,000 years ago. 10,000 generations ago is when we appeared. When the first of our kind appeared, we were born into an ancient battle that continues to this day. And the very language, this is the exact language, is a battle between what is called the sons of darkness and the sons of light. I had a program recently and I shared that, and there was a woman in the audience who was very offended because she thought it was sexist. So
Sexist.
because they didn't.
Their sons?
Because of sons. And what I want to say is that 2,500 years ago, sons included men and women. They didn't have the gender conversation going on that we've got going on right now.
Right.
So we are living, these scrolls, are they ancient? Yes. Are they obsolete? No. We are living right now the battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. And that battle is playing out in terms people are more familiar with, in terms of what we call good and evil. Now, the battle ebbs and flows throughout time. The reason that we're seeing the emphasis on so much evil in our lives, and there are different kinds of evil, and we can talk about that, is because we're barreling down this path toward a convergence point that has been identified as the year 2030.
Right.
So 2030, United Nations has identified this, World Economic Forum has identified this date. There is an event that will happen during that time, and what you're seeing is the powers that be jockeying for position to be in the best place and before we get to that point. This is why you're seeing a concerted effort for the remaking of the world in a way that we've never seen before. I mean, we could do this whole program on how the proposals are to remake the world through the UN Sustainable Goals, SDG 2030, the 17 goals, in partnership with the WEF. That's a whole conversation. What sets now apart from any other time, we've always had the ability to change our world. You mentioned this, because the technology's advanced so quickly.
Yeah.
We now have the ability not only to change the world around us, but now to change the world within us. And there's a concerted effort to replace our humanness with technology within these it's been going on, but we're going to see a doubling down on this within the next 5 years by the year 2030.
What do you mean when you say replace our humanness?
Replace
with technology?
our natural systems and our natural biology.
Winter is coming, and so is cold and flu season. Viruses thrive in cold, dry air, and our immune response is weaker in colder temperatures. I used to get sick often during these months, but I've avoided the flu for years and recover much faster when I do get sick. You've heard me talk about Verso before because I've been using their product for years. And their products have greatly improved my immunity, especially Clean Being. It's made with research-backed ingredients that boost your body's defense systems to fight off viruses when you get introduced to them, preventing you from getting sick in the first place. A strong immune response isn't just about fighting off illness, but also about managing your body's reaction afterwards. Inflammation helps protect against viruses, but too much can cause pain, tissue damage, and slow recovery. Clean Being manages inflammation, keeping your body balanced so it fights sickness effectively without extra problems. This reduces pain and swelling, protects tissues, and prevents overreactions. After taking Clean Being for some time, I've definitely noticed I get sick way less often, if ever. My recovery is way quicker. I have way less joint pain and inflammation, and it's drastically improved my mood, mental state, and energy. Click on the link in the description or head on over to ver.so/Danny and use the coupon code Danny at checkout to save 15% off your first order. That's ver.so/DANNY and use the code Danny, DANNY, at checkout to save 15% on your first order. It's linked below. Now back to the show.
Computer chips in the brain, RFID chips under the skin are already being used in a lot of European countries now. Yeah. Chemicals in the blood to replace our natural biological functions, including our immune system. Yeah. Nanobots circulating in the respiratory system. We have all of this technology now. And here's the thing. It's being marketed. I know it's happening, and I'm still in awe of how sexy the marketing is. The way this stuff is being presented to young people especially, or to grown-ups, to adults, is that it makes life easier. It gives us more security. If you got RFID chips in your body, you can never get lost, can't be trafficked. All that's true. What is the price that we're going to pay? At what price do we want to bring this efficiency and the speed of this information that processing into our lives? So what we're asking is, what do we give away when we give away our biology? And this is the reason. The battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. I'm going to use a word. I know we're covering a lot of ground. I'm going to bring it all together. Mm-hmm. I'm going to use a word that we haven't used. It means different things to different people. So let me use it and then I'll define it. It's a battle for our bodies, for our very humanness, Danny, because there is something within us that is so ancient and so beautiful and so powerful and so precious that nations will go to war against nations to keep us distracted from this essence of ourselves. Societies will be collapsed, climate will be engineered, pandemics will be unleashed, lies will be told. Mm-hmm. All those things are important, but they are distractions, they're diversions that are keeping us from this essence, this force. The human body is the link to something that is called our divinity. Now, divinity to many people has something to do with religion, but the contemporary definition, you look up contemporary definition, divinity, it simply is the ability to transcend perceived limitations, and that's it. Right. Transcend means to become more than perceived, and I love this. It means we may be living limits in our lives that aren't even true, limits that we've been indoctrinated to accept through family, society, religion, culture, science, those limits. So our ability to be the best version of ourselves is the goal, limiting us from the ability to be the best version of ourselves, limiting us from the ability to heal our own bodies, limiting us. So what is divinity? Divinity is the part of us that's timeless, it's ageless. It's where our imagination begins. It's where our creativity begins. It's where our love begins. Sympathy, empathy, compassion, healing, all are functions of human divinity. Yeah. If the powers that be want to change a world, we are much more vulnerable when we lose access to our divinity, when we lose access to our ability to heal our own bodies, to our ability to imagine and communicate what we're imagining and to create and innovate, all of those things. So there's a concerted effort right now, and I can share with you the science. What is it about our biology that actually links us to that divinity? We can get into that, but I just want to go through this step by step.
Well, I see what you're saying. It's been a theme on this show with recent guests that we've had on. There is obviously something going on with the human body. You can see it when you compare us, people living in metropolitan cities, and people that are surrounded by screens all day, inside underneath artificial light, doom scrolling on those dopamine slot machine iPhones that we have all day long, getting all of our information from these screens. And there's a very clear difference between us and people that are living in the Amazon. When you go down there and you're disconnected from all this stuff and you're not surrounded by this artificial light, all these non-native EMFs, all these screens everywhere, these blue light screens that are basically hijacking your circadian rhythm, there's something inside the body that many people have been on the show and described how it quite literally happens to them, and it's eye-opening, where there's these senses that are buried in us that open up once you get out there and you get away from all this civilization and technology. And that seems to be suppressed by everything I just talked about.
It's even more than that. That's everything you're saying. Yes, I lead groups. I just finished in 23. I finished my 49th tour in 47 years into Peru, every year. And when I'm down there with my groups in the high Andes for a couple of weeks, and then we come back, and we usually come back through a major population, either Miami or Dallas is how we come back. The world feels loud and heavy. And you have to really adapt to this world once you unplug from all that. But it goes beyond that. And with your permission, and I realize I'm talking a lot.
That's a good thing.
Well, no, I want to have this conversation, but can I share an experiment? It's a mind-blowing experiment, and it illustrates why our body is so important and why our body is the target of the evil. And this is a form of evil. When we are prevented from accessing our divinity, that is a form of evil. Can you see where that would be?
When we are prevented from accessing our body,
we're prevented from accessing our divinity.
When we're prevented from accessing our divinity,
when you're prevented from
that
accessing,
is a form of evil, because the evil is somebody who wants to control us by blocking us from ourselves.
Divinity is the source of our imagination, creativity, our love, empathy, sympathy, compassion, healing, the very essence of our humanness. These are the values that we cherish, the characteristics that we cherish as a human. If those are veiled, we're still alive, but what kind of beings are
robots.
we? And that is a form of biological evil. There's psychological evil, there's biological evil. So let me share this experiment.
So who's behind this?
Let me share this experiment, and I think it'll make more sense. This is when I show this to live audiences, it's a mind blower. So the Salk Institute did this particular experiment. It's been replicated by other organizations since then. So if we Google this, it may come up with some other organizations. But it was Northern California at the Salk Institute. What they did was they took human neurons separate from a body. So they put them in a petri dish. So here's some cells in a petri dish, not connected to a body.
Okay.
And they had a special computer chip where they could take, I think people are familiar, when you look at a neuron, it's got little dendrites, these little tentacles that look like they're coming off the neuron. They were able to hook those into the port of a computer chip. So now you've got a machine cell interface. So the neuron is actually connected to a special computer chip. All right?
Wow.
But it's not connected to a body. Okay? Now, they took this computer chip and they put it into a computer that was loaded with a primitive video game that came out in 1972 called Pong. I don't know if you remember.
Of course.
Pong, if our viewers aren't familiar with it, was just a very primitive, like a tennis game. And I remember it's so primitive compared to now because we're so sophisticated with this. But back then, it was the thing. I mean, people would spend hours playing this game. So here's what happened. They hooked the chip into this machine loaded with Pong. These neurons began playing the game of Pong, and the longer they played, the better they got. They were learning. So the question, there's no human attached. How does a neuron in a petri dish know how to play the game of Pong? The answer to that question is why this conversation is so important.
Okay, so this is the article right here, published 2022.
I don't know if that's the article. That may be an article.
Brain cells in a lab dish learn to play Pong and offer a window onto intelligence. A dish of living brain cells has learned to play the 1970s arcade game Pong. About 800,000 cells linked to a computer gradually learn to sense the position of the game's electronic ball and control the virtual paddle, a team reports in the journal Neuron. Whoa.
All right, see, even they're missing the point. Because the question is, how does a cell even know to begin to respond, to play this game?
Right.
Okay, so here's the point. Here's the point they're missing. Where science has taken a big turn is we've always thought of our bodies as soft, sticky, gooey, wet, mushy cells and biological stuff. In recent years now, scientists are beginning to look at the human body from an IT perspective, information technology. And the discoveries are not being published in the biology text. They're coming out in IEEE and these obscure engineering journals, the Journal of Advanced Computing Technology. That's where they're showing the study. And nobody, my genre, people aren't reading them, and I don't know about our viewers. So you're not seeing a lot of this stuff. Here is what they found. They literally are saying now that human DNA is a fractal antenna. What that means, fractal antenna, it's not just tuned to one thing, it is tuned to broad spectrum information across a vast array of bandwidths. Okay, it's not just tuned to one. Human cells are also antenna. Human neurons are also antenna. All right. The antenna in that petri dish, the instructions for the Pong are not in the neurons. The neurons are the antenna, the biological antenna that tune to the place, the information in the field that underlies all existence. The field that was revealed, CERN Superconducting Supercollider, 2012, announced that there is a field underlying all existence. They now acknowledge that.
Like a field of consciousness?
Well, some people call it consciousness. It's information. It's a field of information. And now it's a very different way of thinking. And I got to tell you, this is not my training. I was not trained to think this way. I had to cross traditional boundaries and open my mind to follow the data to where it's leading rather than trying to force the data into a pre-existing story.
Right.
All right. And that's important for all of us. So the neurons in the petri dish are in communication with a field. Pong was played by millions of people for so long. There is a vibratory essence held in that field. Some spiritual traditions call it the Akashic Records, or you call it the Matrix or the Divine Matrix or the Planck vibratory field or the 0 point field or whatever you want to call it. There's all, depending on the application, people give it different names. The bottom line is that we are a field of, it's not out there. We are part of that field. And the neurons in that petri dish are tuned to the place in the field where Pong lives. And the longer they play, that's how they are able to get better and better. The neurons in the petri dish are tuned to Pong in the field. The neurons in our brain and in our heart and the cells of our body are tuned to the field that holds our divinity. When our biology is replaced, we no longer have those antennae communicating with that part of the field, and we become lost, we become frightened, we become fearful, and we become vulnerable to the control and the agendas of others. And this, I think, there's so many ways to go about this, Danny. If people are biblically inclined, we've always heard that the body is the temple. 1 Corinthians 3, I think it's 3:16. Know ye not that your body is the temple of God, that God dwells within your body? And people say, okay, cool. This is so interesting as an archaeologist studying ancient temples, whether it's in the Middle East or it's in Asia or Greece or wherever. Ancient temples, when they were built, they were always built in layers. And the innermost sanctum, the innermost room, was always the place where the greatest wisdom and the highest knowledge and the deepest secrets were kept. It was called the Holy of Holies in the temples. If we are a temple, we have not one Holy of Holies, but we have 50 trillion Holy of Holies, because the nucleus of every cell holds the DNA that tunes us to our divinity. That is our Holy of Holies. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. No, we had a gentleman on here the other day who was showing us, aerial images of temples, of ancient temples, and they were shaped like human bodies. Yeah. I think one of them was in Egypt. And I think even the Vatican, he was explaining how like the aerial image of the Vatican, how like the center of it was like a pregnant belly or something. Anyways.
There's an analogy that goes with that. So if we, and this is not for everyone because a lot of people don't want to think this way, but if you are biblically inclined, we are a temple, and within the nucleus of every cell is the DNA that tunes us to our divinity. If you don't want to think that way, just think from IT, information technology. 50 trillion cells in the average human body. Every one of those cells has an electrical potential, 0.07 volts, which is small, but you do the math, 50 trillion times 0.07, it's 3.5 billion volts of potential in one body. I mean, what if you could harness that and apply it to your own healing or to deep intuition, or to super cognition, super memory, super learning? And we can do all these things, but it doesn't stop there, because every cell in the body, I'm smiling because when I put these pictures in a live audience, I've got young people, and I say young, millennials or younger. Every cell in the body functions as a transistor and a resistor and a capacitor. And I put those on the screen, and the kids, they're just like, what are those? And I said, well, these are what used to run our televisions, radios. I'm a musician. They used to run my guitar amplifier. You know, I'd be on stage at night, and the back of the amp was open, and we have these big, they're called 6L6 power tubes that glowed violet in the back, and it was just so beautiful to see. And they say, well, we've never seen that. And then I show them a microprocessor, and they say, oh, we know what those are. And I said, well, every one of these components is on that microprocessor, transistors, resistors, capacitors. And they go, oh, okay, we're with you. So every cell in the body functions as a gated circuit. Information in, information out. It's massaged by resistors, transistors, capacitors biologically within the body. Every cell receives light, and we transmit light. Photons are coming in. We're transmitting. Light is information. We're pulling information in.
Our body creates UV light.
It creates UV light. And I bet our listeners are going to love this, our viewers. Every successful genetic transaction in human DNA is in the genome that we have today. It's preserved. It is transparent. If you know how to look at it, it's right there. It's not hidden. It is secure, and it is immutable because it's distributed throughout the 8 billion people that live on the planet. And if those terms sound familiar, they are the basis for the new financial decentralized finance that that's now emerging in the world. Blockchain technology mimics the way information is stored in the human genome. That's why it's so successful.
That's so funny you say that. I just had a guy, a genome expert, on the podcast like 2 weeks ago who was explaining this exact same thing and how they're doing studies. And Kevin was explaining on how they are saving their sequences and their studies. They're somehow saving them on the blockchain.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, this is so all of the, and I said this earlier, and I knew we'd refer back to it. I have yet, Danny, to see any technology built in the world around us that doesn't mimic what we already do in our bodies. So gated circuits, transistors, resistors, capacitors, photon emitters, photon receivers.
Right.
The DNA literally is a fractal antenna, and we can go on with this, but here's what I learned from being in
What is a fractal antenna? What does that mean?
A fractal antenna means that you're receiving information not from one isolated station. It's fractal, so you're receiving many signals across many bandwidths across a broad spectrum of information.
Interesting.
It's coming in all the time. So one of the things I learned, this is fascinating to me, is the more complex a system is behind the scenes, the simpler the user interface. I mean, look, you just picked up your phone or your iPad. You touch one place and you set into motion a whole cascade of events. You can pay your bills, talk to your friends, and all you did was touch a picture with your finger. That's a very simple user interface for a complex system. We're the same way. We are literally what is called soft technology. We're not the primitive hard technology of computer chips and wires and chemicals. We're more than that. We're human. We are cell membranes and neurons and ion potentials moving across cell walls. And here's the beauty. You don't have to know any of it because our user interface is the bottom line of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions: thought, feeling, emotion, breath, focus, movement, nutrition. That's our user interface. And as we learn, also called epigenetic factors, as we learn to use this user interface, we awaken this soft, highly advanced, technologically sophisticated soft technology. And this is why there's a concerted effort to veil us from this extraordinary potential. And one of the ways of doing that is by replacing our biology with machines. When we lose our humanness, we lose our ability to access our divinity. That is a form of evil. That is biological evil.
Let me pause you right there. Let me ask you this. Do you think that this is a concerted effort or a malevolent effort behind the scenes? Or do you think this is just like Silicon Valley capitalism going off the rails?
Okay.
Have you ever wondered what happened to the legendary Chuck Norris?
That's the wrong question, Danny. What did Chuck Norris happen to?
I recently saw a video he made and I was shocked. He's in his 80s, but he's still kicking butt, working out, and staying active. What's even more shocking is he's stronger, he can work out longer, and he even has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this by making only one change, and he still says he feels like he's in his 50s. His wife even started doing the same thing, and she said she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger and her body looks leaner and she has energy all day long. Don't worry, Chuck made a video that explains everything, and you can make sure you watch it by going to chuckdefense.com/Danny or clicking the link below this video. It will absolutely change the way you think about your health. Once again, it's chuckdefense.com/Danny and click the link in the description below to watch the video now. You won't believe how simple it is. And just a reminder, the legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 84 years old and has more energy than me. He discovered he could create dramatic changes to his health simply focusing on 3 things that sabotage our body as we age. Watch his method by clicking the link in the description box below at chuckdefense.com/Danny.
That's why we began the way we began. You got to go back to the context. We are living a fundamental battle between good and evil. A lot of people, when I was a kid, I was born and raised in northern Missouri, rural northern Missouri, back in the 50s. And we would talk about, and it was a joke. Good and evil was a joke. There's a little red devil that had horns and a pointy tail and a little angel here, and they were having this conversation. You know? Evil is real, and it is deceptive in the way that it plays out. Because we are barreling down the path to this convergence point of 2030, evil is rearing its ugly head. And if you think that's not true, watch the music performance at the Grammys 2 years ago. Literally satanic rituals playing out under the guise of entertainment. Or if you saw the closing ceremonies of the Olympics.
Oh, yeah.
What does the pale white horse of death on the river have to do with the greatest Olympians in the world coming together?
Well, you know what's funny about the Olympics thing? Everyone focused on the what was the
It was the Last Supper.
It wasn't the Last Supper. It was something else. Or no, maybe it was, but it wasn't. It was Dionysus, right? It was Dionysus and Apollo. It was something of Apollo. Anyways, it wasn't. I don't think it was supposed to be the Last Supper. I think it was supposed to be. Can you find out what that was actually called, Steve?
They made it look like the Last Supper for a reason, but the point, they're not trying to hide it anymore because we are, and what they're now doing is the attempt to replace our biology is being made to look like a good thing. We're being told all you have to do is accept this in your body and you'll be safe.
Yeah.
You will be more secure.
Right.
Your life is going to be easier. And people are exhausted because the world has exhausted them in these last few years, and they're just saying, make it better, make it better. If I can go to the grocery store, do my banking, and now I pay for it with an RFID chip, which I've seen in my wrist. They run it over the scanner. They say I'm all in. Because no one,
right. The Feast of Dionysus, right? So we did a whole podcast on this, but like apparently that's not supposed to be. They're saying it's the Last Supper, but I think what Neil was telling us was that was Apollo, that the large woman in the center is supposed to be Apollo.
It was a play on the Last Supper.
Yeah.
And it was a play on the Last Supper to denigrate the meaning of the Last Supper.
Right. Yeah.
So the point is,
that woman is the Jesus Christ we deserve.
I mean, evil playing out. Let me.
There it was. There's the original. So that's Dionysus drinking wine at the bottom.
Okay.
Or eating his grapes.
Here, there's
Apollo,
lady.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. The 7 rays. It's still the same 7 rays that Jesus had in the Last Supper.
What does all this have to do with the Olympics?
It has nothing to do with the Olympics. That's
Exactly.
still ridiculous. But the funny thing is, though, is everyone paid attention to this, and no one paid attention to the badass Gojira concert that was going on. Do you see the metal show that they had? They had this band Gojira, and they had them all like on these balconies, and like they had the drummer on his own balcony.
I heard it.
They had the
didn't see
guitars
it.
on his own balcony. Oh, it was sick. I think that was a definite win for the Olympics. But yeah, this whole thing was silly.
Well, there
it is.
Yeah. Here's the point. And some of it may be just people.
And people like to take it to the extreme too. Like people on the opposite end of everything, they want to make things out to be something they're not. So it's like, you got to try to like be, the truth is usually somewhere in the middle with this stuff.
If you're looking only at that, I would agree.
Yeah.
Now you look at the context
Right.
and where you can see where are the events that are being portrayed, are they in support of life or do they deny life? And are they in support of our humanness or do they deny our humanness?
Right.
And whatever the answer to that is, I mean, this goes so deep. There's a concerted effort to remake our planet. There's a concerted effort to remake our society. There's a concerted effort to remake our very biology. And all of those are playing out at the same time, and they're all being pushed as an agenda by the year 2030.
And who is pushing it? Who's behind it?
Well, there are people who are prone to greed, and you say, well, people do it for greed and money. When you talk about the fundamental evil, they don't need money because they make the money. They don't need that money.
Right.
This is a fundamental battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light to deny life as we know it, to make this world into something that is not good for us. Let me give you an example. Climate change. I'm a geologist. Climate change is a fact. And I've been talking about it since 1979. Humans are not causing it. The studies clearly show the humans are not causing it.
We contribute to it a little bit, though.
You go back and the relation
not enough to like raise the sea levels, but we can. I think it's known that humans do contribute a little bit to climate change, right?
Okay, so what you're saying is that carbon dioxide is contributing to climate change, and that is the problem. You go back and you look at the ice cores, and what you're going to see two things.
Yes.
There is when we look at the Vostok ice cores and they show the relationship between carbon dioxide and the warming of the Earth. What we find is the Earth warms first, and then the carbon dioxide levels rise after that. If the Earth warms first, the carbon dioxide cannot be the cause of the Earth warming.
Really?
Yep. Number one. Number two, you go back and
how do they determine that the Earth is warming by looking at the ice cores?
You can look let's talk about ice cores.
Yeah.
So ice cores, every year there's a new, and I apologize, I made an assumption that's common knowledge because in some circles it is.
About what part?
Ice cores.
Oh, yeah.
Every year.
No, I've talked a lot about ice cores on the show.
Every year there's a new layer of ice that is deposited on the ice caps, Antarctica, at the South Pole and Greenland,
right,
and the North Pole. And when that ice forms, Danny, it captures little pockets of air.
Yes.
And from that air in the ice, and it's preserved, another layer, another layer, another layer. Right now, the deepest layers of the ice cores, to the best of my knowledge, they're called Vostok, V-O-S-T-O-K, and they go back over Vostok Lake, a Russian named lake under the ice. They go back about 420,000 years. Okay, so drill down, and you can see every year what was happening those 420,000 years. So what does it tell you? It tells you the temperature of the Earth. It tells you how much methane was in the atmosphere, how much CO2 was in the atmosphere. It will tell you, and it'll tell you about the magnetic strength of the planet. And if you want to get into details of, the way they can do that, there are gas bubbles that are captured. There are sea life. There's certain forms of sea life called Globigerina that their shells will actually, in the sea cores, the shells will grow clockwise or counterclockwise, depending upon the temperature of the water. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff.
There's even like metals and stuff that can be deposited in there. This is something that Flint was talking about.
You can tell the metals. You can tell about the magnetic strength of the Earth. You can tell how strong the sun, all of those things. So the ice cores are showing us a couple of things. First, they're showing that the temperatures rise, and I'll share with you why.
But when you say the Earth, do you mean the ground?
I'm talking about our planet.
Or are you talking about the atmosphere?
I'm talking about our planet.
But are you talking about specifically, like what I'm saying is, are you talking about, like you're saying that the Earth was warm? Are you talking about just the entire Earth, including the atmosphere?
Well, this is atmospheric temperatures.
Atmosphere, okay, got it.
That we're talking about. And what you will find, first of all, the temperatures rise. This is called the inconvenient data because it doesn't support the narrative.
Right.
Temperatures rise first. There's a lag, and then the CO2 levels will rise. All right, and you can see that very clearly. Now you go back beyond that 420,000. Now let's go back in geologic time. Is CO2 today high? Absolutely. Is it higher than it was 10 years ago? Absolutely. Is it higher than it was 100 years ago? Absolutely. Is that a bad thing?
Right.
Not necessarily.
I agree totally. And
Okay,
if you look at the cosmics, if you look at the long scale, and even if you look at graphs of of CO2 levels and the atmospheric temperatures, even over the last 20,000 years, it is a roller coaster.
Well, here's the thing. You can have high levels of CO2 and the temperatures are low. You can have low levels of CO2 and the temperatures are high. They're not necessarily correlated.
Right. Okay.
Now, is this the most CO2 that the planet has ever had? Absolutely not. Right now, I think we're on what was 440 parts per million. I think is somewhere.
That sounds about right.
Steve,
yeah.
would you check and see? I think it's 440 parts per million.
Yeah, and then maybe find like a graph, like a historical graph of the.
So 440 parts per million.
Yeah.
What is it
you're
today?
spot on. 440 parts per million of levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today.
Yeah. Okay. So is that higher than it was 10 years, 15, 20? Yes. But here's the thing. You go back into geologic period, the Jurassic, the Cretaceous.
Right.
We had 1,000 parts per million and Earth was green and lush and life was thriving. 2,000 parts per million. Earth was green and lush. It's high CO2 is not a death sentence for the planet, but here's what is. Low CO2. If we drop below 180 parts per million, it's a death sentence for this planet. Now, let's do a little experiment. Let's do a thought experiment. I did this in January of 23.
We start planting more trees.
No, as a geologist, I said, okay, let's look at the proposed CO2 limits. Let's look at the proposed CO2 limits right now. If we were to meet all these limits, what would the Earth look like? All right, they are proposing a reduction from 2010, and I think they want about a 45% reduction. It brings us down to about 220 parts per million. All right, 182 is considered a death sentence for our planet. When we reach that level, the forests begin to die.
Right.
All right. And the temperatures are colder and the ice is greater in the northern hemisphere. So CO2 is not like a little dial where you can like click it and say, well, we need to bump it up or bump it down. The level that they're pushing for is only 35 to 36 parts per million away from a really, really bad level for Earth. So I did an experiment. When was the last time Earth was at 220 parts per million CO2? Last time we saw that was a geologic time called the Pleistocene.
Last ice age?
All right. Pleistocene, low CO2, the forest died. They want to push our temperatures back. We're an average right now, I think 59 degrees Fahrenheit is a global average, give or take.
Right now?
Right now, global average.
Oh, wow.
And they want to push us back to about 46 degrees, global average. If we make this planet geologically like the Pleistocene, it's not good for us.
Right.
It's not good for humans. Would you agree with that?
No, I totally agree with that.
Okay, so let's put that aside. Now, look at what's happening on this week. What is happening is the major powers of the earth are being provoked to destroy one another. They're being provoked to create war, to deplete weapons resources, to deplete munitions, to deplete human power, to deplete entire populations. War is not good for us. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
Okay, and you put that there. Now, look at what's happening socially. This is evil, climatic evil. This is evil. Conflict, war is evil.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now
especially thermonuclear war.
Now you look at what is happening. There's a concerted effort to break the social bonds that have always held societies together. Now, it's really tricky the way it's happening because they're important topics. 2014, the Occupy movement, the rich against the poor. That's a real problem. It is real. We need to talk about it, but here's the thing. We need to talk about it in a kind way so that we can solve the problem, become a better society for it. It was weaponized to divide us rather than used to bring us together. Then the same thing happened, men against women in the Me Too movement. Really important. We need to talk about. These are real problems. It was weaponized to divide us, to break that social bond and our trust. and our confidence. The same thing is now happening against Christians against Muslims, blacks against whites, Jews against Muslims, men against women, adults against children. Now it's the gender conversation. Every one of these is important, and every one is being weaponized to divide us. We're breaking the social bonds that have strengthened us as a society. Now they're going after religion. And when you have no social bonds left, when there's nothing left to trust, you become very vulnerable as a society to the ideas and the agendas of others. And you're seeing this concerted, you put this all together. I'm a systems thinker. A systems thinker looks at the big picture and then goes to the nanosecond of where we fit into that big picture. The big picture is that we are all casualties of these systems that are being put into place that are not good for us. And so you have to say, if they're not good for humans, who are they good for? That's a whole conversation we can have. But the point is, now the attack is on our very humanness, to separate us from our own. The human is defined by our genetics. When we begin to give our biology away to technology, we give our humanness away. Humanness is the link to the divinity. We give away our ability for empathy, sympathy, compassion, love, all of these things. What kind of a society do we become? Ray Kurzweil released his book earlier this year called The Synchronicity.
Yeah. Oh, is that what it's called? The Synchronicity?
Synchronicity,
oh, okay.
yeah. And I'm sorry, not the synchronicity. It's when we become part of the internet of all things.
Oh, singularity.
The singularity.
The singularity.
Yeah, okay,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
So what he says is by the year, and he identified 2030, he said, when you talk to somebody in the street, you won't be talking to a pure human. You will be talking to someone who's a human-machine hybrid to some degree.
Some people love that idea.
But by the year 20, because they don't know what they're giving away.
Steve wants robot cops.
They don't know what they're giving away.
Steve wants the cops to be robots. AI.
I don't care about the cops out there. I don't want the technology in my body.
Right.
And this is the thing. I was just in L.A. and there's robot cars everywhere.
I know, it's crazy.
It was. They pulled up next to me and I waved and they didn't wave back.
Yeah.
No, it's pretty wild.
It's so wild. That's in Texas too, I think.
Yeah. Kurzweil says by the year 2045 is when we will all become part of the internet of all things, where all of our resources, all the animals of the earth are all digital. Everything we eat, everything that we consume, our bodies are all, unless there's a change in thinking. The purpose of this book, Pure Human, was to identify that these things are happening, number one, for an awareness, hopefully to develop a deeper appreciation for what it means, and even a pride for what it means to be a human, because our humanness is being denigrated in our schools today. Young people are taught that we are flawed. From the moment we're born, we are flawed species, and we need something outside of us to be the best version of ourselves and to compete in the world. And that something is being touted as technology. And young people are all in because no one has taught them that they are a rare, powerful, beautiful, precious form of life that's not the result of random mutations over a long period of time. There's an intentional act in our genome that is very well documented with the fusions of chromosome 2 or chromosome number 7. They cannot happen in nature. There's an intentional act underlying all of these things, but nobody's telling our young people this. So unless we change our thinking, Yuval Harari just opened the WEF, and I think it was in 2022. He said, unless there's a change in thinking, we most probably are the last generation of pure humans that the universe will ever know, unless we exist somewhere else. We're the last generation. I think we're worth preserving. I think we're about to give away our humanness, and we don't even know what it means to be human. We don't even know what we're giving away because we're only beginning to understand what these capacities and these capabilities are all about. So that's why I'm very passionate about the book. And even if we weren't talking about the book, I think it's important for us to recognize that evil has so many forms, and they're subtle forms. So there are people who are predisposed psychologically to greed and to power. They're pawns, and they're not necessarily smart pawns, but these are the ones that we see publicly. And they are succumbing to the opportunity to indulge in their own vices and their vice of power, their vice of control. But ultimately, We're going to go right back. That scroll that I talked about, that we began talking about, it goes even further. It says there will be 7 battles between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. 6 will be won by the sons of light, 6 by the sons of darkness. I'm sorry, 3 by the sons of light, 3 by the sons of darkness. That's only 6. The 7th battle, it says the sons of light prevail, but here's the catch. They prevail with divine intervention and through their own divinity. Through us accepting our own power, we prevail. So what does this mean? This isn't the kind of, when you think about battles, people think about the old idea where there's like force against force. That's obsolete. That's what keeps us stuck in the battle. Mm-hmm. We don't want to win this battle. we want to triumph. And triumph is different than winning. To triumph, it means we rise above. And how do you triumph in this battle? By becoming the best version of yourself. That's it. Living the best version of yourself. Where's your joy come from? And live it without fear. Love without fear. Imagine, innovate, create, share your ideas, forgive, heal your own body, because that is our birthright. This is how we triumph, because when you do that, you've defeated the evil that is trying to keep you from being the best version of yourself.
Yeah, totally.
That's what
the scariest thing is how this technological world that we're living in, that's developing more and more every day, and Silicon Valley and all of these social media companies that are essentially controlling the world. I mean, Google and YouTube. Yeah. You want to talk about like a modern day Rockefeller, like
it's evil.
A huge monopoly that controls everything, controls the information, draws the lines on where you can go and where you can't go on a conversation during a podcast, and how that is basically merged with centralized medicine. It's the centralization of all of the media and medicine, which is the most frightening thing to me.
Yep. This is a form of evil. The media is a form, I said, there's psychological evil. And we saw this play out during this. We see it play out all the time, but we saw it really emphasized in this last election here in the United States. By the way, this is the year 2024. This is the first time in the history of the modern world, 40 nations have had elections for new leaders in the same year.
Really?
40 nations. Steve can look that up.
I didn't even know that.
40, and they're all saying we want a new direction. And I think that's the good news. They're saying we don't like where this handful of people in positions of power are taking us. Because, I mean, I'm thinking I think this is the 47th year I've done this work in one form or another. Wow. And I've been blessed. I've traveled and seen just the most beautiful, magnificent, isolated, pristine places in the world, and ancient peoples and modern peoples. And what I know is this: people, our brothers and sisters, we don't always like each other because of our cultures, but we do love one another. And there's something inherent within us. Even if you don't like someone, you'll go out of your way to save someone without even thinking about it. If you see them in a fire, you see a car wreck, see someone drowning, we're wired for love, not to like, but to love. Yeah. And what I've learned is that people of the world know how to get along. It's not the people in Lima, Peru, and Beijing, China, bumping chest with Washington, D.C. It's a handful of leaders in positions of power, but the people know how to get along, and the people know how to care for one another and how to raise their families. Yeah. So this is all coming to this convergence point in these next 5 years. If the goals are met that are being proposed, and the policies are already being written, the laws are being enacted, this is all formalized now, because
by who?
Well, the WEF.
Yeah. You think Trump's going to put a stop to that stuff?
The WEF began in 1971, and they've always had these elitist ideas, which is, and they meet in Davos. That's cool. Yeah. They can sit around and talk about what they think the world should be, and it affects no one. Here's where that changed, and a lot of people don't know this. 2019, they formalized an agreement. They signed an agreement with the United Nations to use the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, UN SDG 2030, to implement their ideas because they felt they were so closely aligned. All right, UN SDG 2030. These are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Steve can look them up. They look beautiful on the surface. If you read them,
Right.
For example, who wouldn't want food security? Who wouldn't want end to poverty? Who wouldn't want end to disease? Who wouldn't want those things?
Right.
Now you read the fine print. How are they going to achieve those things? And this is where it gets really scary.
The Patriot Act. How about that one? That's a great title.
Well, this is so the right now the U.S. is the problem because we are a nation that was founded on principles of divinity, the divine nature of human existence. And because of that, we have freedoms. I mean, we can do a whole program on that. Who was it that founded this nation, and where did those ideas come from? Well, the Masons go back to the Templars. The Templars, actually, Columbus was funded by the Templars.
Right. I heard that recently.
Oh yeah, you look at this.
He came over on a sail with a Knights Templar badge on the sail.
He was funded by Templars. Templars are kind of a mixed bag. But when you go, the Magna Carta, for example, was the first document that reflected any semblance of freedoms of people under government. And many of those ideas were then reflected from the Masons in the Templar tradition in the Declaration of Independence. So of the 56 people that signed the Declaration, 13 were Masons, and they reflected that.
Yeah.
And this is the point, that America, the freedoms of America are a problem for this global vision. And so you're seeing a concerted effort to break America. And it is having success in some respects.
It certainly looks like that's happening.
Yeah. Well, you're also seeing, can I talk about America?
Of course.
Just for a moment?
Yeah.
I love this country. The idea of this country. And there isn't a difference between the idea and the implementation. Right now, the implementation is flawed because it's been hijacked.
Yeah.
But the idea, and this isn't science, this is now my personal opinion that I'm sharing. I believe that America was founded for this time in history because it is the only nation that was given the freedoms that allow us to transcend the oppression that's being proposed during this time in history. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of people, I've traveled the world, and I have a lot of friends that say, well, what's so special about America? We can do the same thing in England. We can do the same thing in Australia, New Zealand, Canada that you guys do. Our government lets us do all the things that you do, and that is...
Until shit goes sideways.
Well, they just nailed it right there. They said their government allows it. And what a lot of people don't understand is what sets America apart. And our young people are being taught America is trash, and they're being taught that we're flawed, and to really disrespect the history that we have. And
well, currently with the state, I don't blame people for having that sentiment now in today's day and age, and looking what's happening with the government right now. It's insane.
We failed our young people. We failed a whole generation. Yeah. But what people don't understand is this. This is what sets the Declaration, one of the many things, but this is the primary factor, is that the word inalienable, a lot of times people miss what that means. Our government did not give us free speech, and our government didn't give us the right to bear arms and protect our families and our property. Our government didn't give those to us. They are inherent in our existence by virtue of us walking and breathing as humans in America. That's what the word inalienable, it means it comes with being.
That is the point of the United States of America.
And this is the only nation that has spelled it out like that, and that is a problem. As long as we protect that, we have the legal means to preserve some semblance of freedom. And of course, we all know those are under attack right now. And the World Economic Forum, interestingly, the most recent iteration in 2023. They see the biggest problem in the world is the inability to control information.
Mm-hmm. You see that video of John Kerry at the World Economic Forum?
He said the First Amendment is the problem.
It's getting in the way of regulating information and disinformation
and
online.
He doesn't even know what he said. He doesn't even know how blatant.
He stuttered a few times before he said that.
Well, he probably thought about it afterwards.
Yeah.
I bet he got a phone call. but it was in his heart. This is what he truly believes. This is a fundamental battle between good and evil. Evil plays out in many. That is a non-kinetic form of evil. This is psychological evil.
Right.
Let me just tell you about kinetic evil. I was in a hotel room in London, October 7th, 2023, when the Nova Music Festival was under attack. America was asleep because of the time difference, 8 hours for me, 7 or 8 hours. I was getting ready to go on stage to present at a live event. And I was getting the news feeds in my hotel room, the raw news feeds from Asia, India, and the Middle East. Raw footage of what was happening at that Nova Music Festival. And it was nothing short of pure evil. I mean, worse than the World War II videos in Vietnam. I mean, it was horrible, worse than horrible. I cried. I had a hard time going on stage. That night, I came back to my hotel to pick up the American news feeds. America was not allowed to see. To this day, America has not been allowed to see the truth of what happened on October 7th. Now, they've got reasons for it. They say, well, social media, community guidelines won't let us show the images. The networks, the many networks that are owned by only 6 corporations, the agreement was made not to show America. So what was the result of that? On college campuses, people said there was a denial. They said those atrocities never happened. If they had have happened, we would see them. Where are they? Show them to me. And so now you've got this divide that people say it was all made up. It never happened. They deny that any of that happened. And the people that actually lived, what was it going on? That is pure evil. And when I saw that unleashed, I said, we're living this rare, precious moment. It's not going to last forever. We're going to get through all this. We're going to get through all the tension we're seeing in the world. And you and I should come back and have a conversation. Yeah. We're going to get through it. The question is, Danny, and this is what I think, if we come at it from a spiritual perspective, we're going to get through it. The question is, what do we become having gone through this? What do we allow the events of the world to make us into? Do we allow the events of the world to make us hate and to drive us to our most primal instincts of fear and revenge and hate? Or can we find a way to meet what the world is showing us and demonstrate our divine humanness? And this is the key. This is the key. It doesn't mean that we have to roll over and play dead, for people that say bad things to us, because we all have to fight sometimes. And I think we may need to fight for our humanness, and I think we're worth fighting for. But here's the key. When we fight, when we argue, or if you're on a battlefield, are you fighting because of the hate and the fear for your enemy in front of you, or are you fighting because of your love for the people and the families and the truth that is at your back? That is the spiritual battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. What does the world make us become? And the way that we triumph is if we have to fight from our love of what we know is possible and the gift of our humanness, rather from the anger and hate that just destroys us. And you talk to any soldiers. I've got friends, special forces, they've devoted their whole lives and they've come home and they're broken. They say, what was the purpose of my life? And the purpose is that they were fighting the kinetic battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light, good and evil. So this is one way of positioning it. I mean, there's a million ways to see it. But in the brief time that we have together, I wanted to give a framework, a context. The book is identifying that there is a concerted effort to replace our biology, and then all the new discoveries that are telling us we already are the technology that they're trying to replace us with, except we do it better.
Right.
Can I just give an example? I mean, I said it. Can I give an example?
Yeah.
Of that? This is an amazing study that was done. So young people are being taught to idolize computer chips, artificial intelligence, because they're fast and efficient. And they are. Is a chip fast and efficient? Absolutely. But is it scalable? And here's the thing. You can never scale a computer chip. It will always be limited by the physics of the stuff it's made of.
Right.
So if a chip's made out of silicon, not all of them are, but if it's a silicon chip, the atoms that make that silicon, the information's always going to be able to move so fast between those atoms. Now, is it fast, efficient? Yes. Scalable? It is finite in its scalability. Okay, and we know that. And we're actually reaching the limits of our computer chips right now through Moore's law that says you double the speed, every so many years. Well, the number of years is collapsing and the speed is increasing, and we're down now to that level where we're not going to be able to double that much more. Now you look at a human neuron. Is it fast? It is. What is its upper limit? And the truth is that we don't know, because every time a neuron is pushed to what was believed to be a limit by scientists and medical experts in the textbooks, we do what humans do. Our neurons will morph and adapt and embrace that limit to be able to open an entirely new vista now of possibilities. And we do this again and again and again and again. What is the scalability? The upper limits of a human neuron, we appear to be infinite. This is a form, it's a very different way of thinking. Danny, it's what we call a soft technology. We are so advanced. Our engineers strive to create in a laboratory what we now are capable of doing in our bodies. So young people are being led to believe that a computer is better than a human brain, that our brains are flawed and weak and subject to, all kinds of failure modes. So scientists did a little experiment. What they did was they compared a human brain to a microprocessor, and the comparison, they compared the synapses within the brain to the transistors on the processor. And what's interesting is that we have about the same number. I think the brain has about 10 to the 14th synapses and 10 to the 11th microprocessor. So it's pretty close. But here's what they found. When all was said and done, that the human brain is about 100-fold more faster and more accurate than the processor, than the microprocessor is. The biological neurons were more efficient and they were faster. And part of that is because of the way the brain, we do triage of information. When that information comes in, we send it out to different parts of the brain in different brain states. Some of the information we may process in the alpha state, some of it we may process in a beta state. So it's a very different way of looking at the human body from an IT perspective. But the point is that we meet and in many cases exceed the capacities of the very technology that we're being encouraged to replace our bodies with. This is something that nobody's telling, our young people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read a book all about the creation of DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research. I think it used to be called ARPA. Now it's called DARPA. Where they were during the Cold War working on. I think that's where GPS came from.
That's where the internet came from.
The internet. I think Jacques Vallée was a big part of that. And one thing that they were talking about in that book by Andy Jacobson, it's sensational, was that they actually were developing brain chips like Neuralink. They were developing Neuralink in the 90s for soldiers, to create super soldiers, to be able to avoid pain and to increase endurance. And they were working on different. I have a friend who lives in Tampa who's a nutritional biologist, and the DoD contracted him to figure out how to make it so Navy SEALs could breathe oxygen rebreathers without getting oxygen toxicity seizures. And he developed like this special, he basically found out that like essentially ketosis, the keto diet is able to mitigate that. And now they're applying that to epilepsy patients.
Sure.
By putting them on keto diets, like they don't have the seizures anymore.
I was insane. A diver when I was at FIT. As an ocean sciences major, we had 30 weeks, 3 10-week quarters rather than semesters of Navy certified scuba. And during that time, they were developing the liquid breathing apparatus so that humans can breathe at extreme depths without their lungs collapsing because of the external pressure. And it was all based on the idea that we derive oxygen in our mother's womb from liquid. In our mother's womb, we breathe the liquid, and now they were able to duplicate that with the right combination of nitrogen, oxygen, liquid, and you fill your lungs with a liquid, and then when you go to deep diving, the pressure around you doesn't collapse the tissues inside. So they did this? That was in the 70s. I don't know where it is now. Really? I can't see what he's doing there.
Liquid breathing is a technique that involves breathing an oxygen-rich liquid instead of air. It has been proposed for use in deep diving. Liquid breathing can help divers match their body pressure to the surrounding water pressure, making breathing easier. It also eliminates the need for decompression and problems like nitrogen, narcosis, and the bends.
The bends, yeah.
So have they done this? Can you scroll down?
Well, I don't know officially. I don't know that they're acknowledging that. They were doing it back in the 70s. I don't know where it is now. I haven't kept up with the technology. Does it say that they're actually are they offering it commercially?
I don't know. I don't know. Steve,
I'll just Google it. I'll ask the Google.
The point is
the Neuralink thing is crazy. Like the fact that they've been doing that since the 90s and we don't know about it until like a couple of years ago when Elon's talking about it.
Well, the FDA just approved it. This 2023, the FDA approved Neuralink in humans. And this is, Danny, this is one of those cases. And I go back this again and again. I have been in the tech world most of my adult life, in the academic world, because they're closely related. I did not pursue my advanced degrees in academia because I was hired in the industry to do the work. And so... Does it say that?
It looks like it's not really. I mean, it says it's uncommon.
He can't find anything. Wait, go up. What is that? It says it has been the subject of experimental clinical use and science fiction. There are several biological and physiological hurdles to make it.
I don't think
that makes it unlikely for deep sea diving.
I don't think it's something they're doing every day, but it is possible to do it.
Yeah.
It is. It has been done under laboratory conditions, and they were doing that back in the 70s. So the effort to try to replace our humanness with the technology, I mean, that's something that goes way back. Working in the industry, there's always been the question, and there's always been two schools of thought. And during the Cold War, I mean, these were really heated discussions. One school of thought says just because we can do something means that we should. In other words, they say we would never have been led to figure this out if we weren't meant to do it, whatever it is, whether it's weapons or biology or, whatever it is. The other school of thought says not so fast. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. And in many cases, what I've seen is the technology evolves faster than the morality of how we apply it in our lives.
Sure.
And I think we're seeing it now. The technology is moving so quickly. What gives us the right to replace the human body? And most people don't even know why they shouldn't. Right. But what you're talking about, the chip, I mean, the technology can be a beautiful thing. There are examples of men and women, servicemen and women, who have lost arms and legs, sometimes both arms or both legs. And they come home, and what a beautiful thing to have a computer chip in the brain that communicates with the prosthetics that now allow them to hold their babies in their arms and brush their own teeth and feed themselves. I mean, we take those things for granted. That's a beautiful application of that technology. So it's not the technology, it's the thinking underlying it, the thinking that has been instilled into 2 generations at least of young people, and now they're adults. And we're doing it in our schools today, is that carbon-based life in general and human life specifically is a flawed form of life. And among our flaws are believed to be human emotion, which can cloud our logic and our decision-making and our judgment. That's considered to be a flaw. Human conception, sexual conception, because the truth is you never know what you're going to get. And so the technologists say, oh, well, we can fix that. We can fix that through gene editing. We can fix that.
Designer babies.
But now the babies don't even have to be inside of a mother's womb.
Right.
Artificial wombs are now being developed. The most advanced that I've seen, they're expecting FDA to approve them within 5 years.
Even in vitro fertilization, I mean, that's kind of, in a way, I had an anthropologist on the show, and he was explaining how that's a scary road to go down.
Well, all of it is because the point of all of this is that when biology is based upon demand, there's an adage in biology, and we've all heard it, use it or lose it. Usually you hear it for people getting older. If they don't use their muscles, if they don't use their sex life, those things, we lose those.
Yeah.
That applies to replacing the human body with technology. When we replace our natural biology with synthetic and artificial systems, our body believes that it no longer needs to perform those functions, and they begin to atrophy in one generation.
Right.
Next generation, through epigenetics, the body says, oh, we used to do it that way, but we have chemicals to do it now for us, in the immune system, for example, or the reproduction or something like, and pretty soon, within a generation, those abilities begin to atrophy and become a vestige of something that we used to do. And this is how you lose a species. This is precisely how you lose a species. We are on the cusp right now of giving our humanness away to technology. And it's not like you can say, well, let's try it for a year, and if it doesn't work, we'll go back to what we used to be, or try it for a generation.
No.
Once it's gone, it's gone. And nobody's telling our young people that. All they're being taught is that we are a flawed form, a weak, powerless victim of the world around us, a flawed form of life. Nobody's telling our young people how special and how precious human life and how beautiful a human life really, really is. And when you begin to understand divinity, not from a religious perspective, our DNA is tuned. It's an antenna. It's picking up signals. And those signals are what give us life and love and healing and our imagination and creativity. And if you sever that signal, what kind of a person are you? You're still alive. You're still breathing. You're still functioning. You have no empathy, no sympathy. Part of the way warfare, and I learned this during the Cold War, one of the reasons warfare works is because we play on the empathy of the other side, assuming that the other side wants their family to live or wants to preserve their own bodies. If you take that away, now you have soldiers that have no divinity. They have no sense of self or purpose. They have only mission in mind. Our super soldier, yeah. What kind of a world is that? I mean, this is like the most dystopian of our scientific, the horror movies that you see on sci-fi coming into reality. The Germans started this during World War II. They were actually trying to develop super soldiers. Yeah. And there's a whole conversation we can have about that, how far they got, what happened to those doctors after the war. They were incorporated into the medical systems of the world and the medical systems that we rely upon today. So the thinking, it's all to support the idea. It's not the technology. It's the thinking underlying the technology. In a world where we're living a fundamental battle between good and evil, that's the context we have to go back to. We're being led to and being deceived to relinquish the gift of our humanness in exchange for efficiency and speed and technology without being told what the consequences really are. What is it that we're giving away? Another example of this, I mean, this has happened long enough. Young kids, there are case studies of young people babies. They get up in the morning, eat their Captain Crunch or Cheerios or whatever it is for breakfast. The parents sit them in the living room and put an AI visor on their head to entertain them so the parents can get some work done. Mm-hmm. Hours at a time. Okay, so now what's happened to this kid? They're seeing images that they would never see in the backyard with their friends. They're hearing sounds. They're seeing colors, intense experiences. But here's the key. It's all being done for them. They're not using their imagination to create them. You know, you and I mean, I don't even know how old you are, but I bet when you were a kid, you used to take a blanket from the closet and drape it over a couple of chairs in the living room, and now you got a tent in your living room, and now you're a tent that's an outpost on the surface of a faraway planet, and you wear your raincoat because it's a radiation coat that keeps you safe when you're exploring this planet. We're using our imagination. Yeah. Right? The young kids are not. And so here's what's happening. The psychology is showing this. Their brain size is stunted. Their cognitive development is stunted. Their muscles have atrophied because they're not using their muscles, and their body size. But there's a part of their brain that is enlarged. It's the visual cortex, because they're engaging that visual cortex with the AI. That's all they're doing and the same thing happens with people who've done a lot of ayahuasca. The plant medicine, a few times is no big deal. Habitual use over a long period of time, what happens is the visual cortex begins to thicken, and it distorts the way that we perceive reality. Now, if you're a shaman in the jungle of Costa Rica who lives in the jungle of Costa Rica, that's no big deal. But if you're sitting behind a computer terminal writing the software for the nuclear triggers of a nation's nuclear arsenal and doing ayahuasca recreationally hundreds of times with your friends on the weekend, it's going to impact your ability to function and to do those things properly. So, I mean, this is just examples of how when imagination and creativity are replaced with the AI and things like that, it's not just passive entertainment. It actually is influencing, it's affecting the way these young kids are growing up. And we have a whole generation that know only computers, only the blue lights you're talking about.
Yeah, and the dopamine part of it too, how it hijacks your dopamine feedback and the loop in your brain, how you get that dopamine from these things, from these phones and from these screens, like video games, or this like mindless scrolling, these doom scrolling that you can do on like Instagram and reading stuff on Twitter. Like, that's not how you're supposed to get dopamine. That makes you quite literally, it makes you a slave to these devices.
Well, this is part of what is happening. We now have a generation. I think the millennials are the last generation. They bridged no mobile phones and mobile phones. The millennials remember a time when we had dial-up telephones, or early millennials. But we now have a generation of people that only know the world through a mobile phone, an iPad, a computer. And dating is happening through texting. People are breaking up over a text. They'll have an emotional relationship and they'll break up on the text, and that's it. No conversation. And the person, the breakup is devastated. Right. The breakup just is ready to move on. I had an experience I think it was before COVID. I took a group to Peru and that year. And there were two people that traveled with us, and they're really sweet men, two beautiful, sweet men who had been friends for a long time, who both had kids, sons, who were within a year or two from one another. And they said, let's do this father and son thing. So each of the men came, and they each brought, one was 15, one was 16. They stopped in Miami because we flew out the next day. And the kids went to the young men. I shouldn't call them kids. I apologize. They were young men. They went to a rave party the night before they left, and both of their cell phones were stolen. They embarked on a 2-week journey in the Andes with no technology for the first time in their lives. And we got to see the withdrawals. We got to see it happen. They were very anxious, edgy. Yeah. They became depressed. They slept in the mornings. They wouldn't get up to come out and see Machu Picchu and the sacred site. Well, at that time it was a sacred valley. So Ollantaytambo and the sacred sites. Their fathers would go and they'd come home and they were just not communicating at all. It was well into the second week. Something beautiful began to happen. And it's like they came out of this haze. And they started communicating with each other, started communicating with their dad. They started really getting into the culture and the people and the food and having a great time.
Yeah, they wake up.
It was almost sad that we had to come home. We did. And then when they went home, I assume they got their phones, but now they had their phones and they had the reference point of knowing themselves in the absence of the phones.
Right.
Now they have to make a choice. What kind of a man do I want to be? Do I want to be a slave to this? I don't have my phone here, but to this technology.
Right.
But we all, and the whole group watched it happen. And we were, I mean, we know it, but it's amazing when you actually see it, how much of an influence this technology has on us. So this is not anti-tech. This is about hopefully developing a deeper appreciation for our humanness. And I like to take it a step further, even a sense of pride. I am proud to be a human because when you read the ancient texts and when there's a whole another facet of this I'd like to go into. There is something about us that is rare in this universe. It is precious. Can I share a couple of stories? Are you okay if I?
Of course.
Another perspective. And this isn't for everyone, but everyone learns differently. Everyone learns differently. So I'm going at this from a number of different ways, and somebody will pick up something that means something to them. There was a researcher, Harvard trained. He was the head of psychiatry at Harvard University, 1990s, and I had the honor and the privilege of knowing and touring with him on the conference circuit. His name was John Mack.
Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with John Mack.
Okay, so I knew John. We toured together before he was mysteriously killed. And there's a lot of uncertainty about precisely how that happened.
The wrong way, crossing the street in London, right?
He wasn't crossing a street. He was on the sidewalk, and the car left the street. He was on the sidewalk after the conference. He had dinner with friends at night. He was walking home at night. The car left the street camp on the sidewalk, struck him down, and returned to the street. And he was conscious when they found him, and he died not long after that. He was the first scientist that gave credibility to the phenomenon of what we today call alien abduction.
Yes.
Now, this has taken on a whole new meaning because of what's happening in Congress, the disclosure hearings that are having about do we have technology? Have we met these beings? Do we have in our possession all that? So this is in the 90s before, all this was under wraps.
Right.
And what John Mack did was he said, look, prior to that time, the scientific and the medical community said, these are just crazy people, schizophrenic.
Yes.
John Mack said, look, this is happening on every continent, in every culture, and it's been happening for hundreds of years. Let's look into this scientifically. If it is mental illness, we'll prove it.
And why are all these testimonies of these folks, why are they all so similar?
Well, that's exactly where I'm going. So one of the things he found across all the cultures and the countries and the language and everything, there were common themes. Not 100%, but there were these overlapping common themes. One of the themes plays into exactly and supports what we're talking about here. That's why I'm sharing it. One of the things people would ask as an abductee, I probably would as well, is why me? Why have you chosen me, and what is it, that you want me to know, or what do I need to know? And one of the common themes was that these beings that did the abducting, the abductors, were actually life from other worlds, advanced forms of life, and they are here, they said, because we're at a point in our evolution that they were in their evolution a long time ago, where they had to choose between biology and technology. They chose technology, and they're sorry that they did that because they lost so much of their biology. They lost the ability for emotion. They lost the ability to conceive internally, sexually. It's all asexual. And they want that back, and they're warning us not to make the same choice. So that's one category. Another one is really really fascinating to me. It was not John Mack, but there was a study that was done. Not everyone fit into the John Mack category. There were a large number of people that revealed that the abductors are not aliens from another world, but they're us.
That makes the most sense to me.
From another time. They're us from our own future. These are humans coming back because we gave our humanness away to technology. They're the product of the loss of their humanness. They're warning us not to do it, and they're also want it back. And they're thinking
that would explain the extraction of eggs and sperm.
Exactly, egg, sperm, and DNA. They're thinking they can at least merge some of this back into their existence. Mm-hmm. Whether you believe either of them or not, some people are more drawn to one or the other, but they're both saying the same thing. There's something about us that's worth preserving. There's something about us, and that this isn't going to go on for decades. We're at this, this is within the next year, 2 years, 3 years, certainly 5 years between now and 2030. If we give our humanness away, we can never go back. And they are inviting us or warning us not to do that from two very, very different perspectives. Isn't that interesting?
Another interesting thing about the testimony from all the people that John Mack talked to is that a vast majority of them said that when they asked these beings during these experiences they had, whether you want to believe that they were real experiences or whether they happened all inside their head, either way, a vast majority of these folks said when they asked these beings who they were, where they were from, a lot of them said they were from the future. Yeah. They didn't say they were from other planets or whatever. And if you look at all the living species on Earth.
They were Earth, from humans from Earth.
Exactly.
Where'd you come from?
Well, that makes
we didn't come from anywhere. We came from here, from Earth.
Right. Exactly. And if you want to, compare extraterrestrials from another galaxy or from another Goldilocks planet in another solar system to us, first of all, what would be their incentive to try to warn us and try to save us, right? Why would we want to travel across the galaxy just to warn this other civilization not to destroy themselves, right? It would make sense if they were us from the future, they would have an incentive to do that. Another thing, anthropologically, easy for you to say, is that
this is a team.
Yeah, exactly. There's I think there's over 2 million cataloged species of animals on Earth. 20 of those are hominids, and one of those 20 happens to be upright walking hominids that can control and manipulate their environment, right? And we happen to also be the one of the 20 out of the 2 million that can develop technology that can leave the Earth, right? And look at look at how rare we are on planet Earth as a species that can do this and attain this level of technology, right? Now extrapolate that out into the universe. Out of all the Goldilocks planets, how much life have we found on other planets, right? Now look at the variety of conditions that these Goldilocks planets we do know of exist in, the difference in gravity, the difference in the atmosphere.
Sure.
Most of them are water worlds. Some of them are binary star systems. So what are just looking at the percentage of us compared to all the other catalog species of mammals and living things on Earth, species on Earth, what are the chances that another species on another Goldilocks zone planet that can inhabit life is going to evolve to look like us with 2 arms, 2 legs, upright walking bipedal hominids with 2 forward-facing eyes, brain sits on top of the head, just like we do?
I'm glad you asked.
That's so unbelievably
can I tell you
rare.
what the odds are?
None. 0%?
Scientists say when the odds of something occurring are 1 in 10 to the 400th power, that is considered impossible. Mm-hmm. So if we go down to 7-Eleven and get a lottery ticket and they say 1 in 10 to the 400th, you might as well forget it. The odds of our genome forming the way it has formed, and I want to talk about how it formed, but the odds of that happening are 1 in 10 to the 600th. So if 1 in 10 to the 400th is impossible, 1 in 10 to the 600th means it's more than impossible that we are the product of random processes, lucky biology. that there is, and as a scientist, I have to say the evidence supports, not just suggests, it supports there's an intentionality underlying our existence. That intentionality may be the link to the beings from other worlds. A higher intelligence would, and in our ancient texts, there are different ways of looking at that. Are we talking about gods? Are we talking about angels? Are we talking about Nephilim? Are we talking, whatever? That's a whole conversation. Mm-hmm. The point, higher intelligence intervened. And we know this. Now, I want to be really clear. Are you okay if we have this conversation, this part? Do we have time?
Yeah, we got more than enough time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, as a geologist, I believe in evolution. So I'm not anti-evolution. I've seen it in the fossil record when I did my field work. I saw it for plants, insects, animals. Darwin's theory of evolution breaks down when it comes to humans. We showed up mysteriously 200,000 years ago, and we don't know where we came from. What we do know, now that we have we can do what's called forensic DNA. Mm-hmm. And this is only, within the last few years, we can look at our genome and look backwards, reverse engineer what had to happen to give us our humanness. For me, the smoking gun, there are a couple, but I think the one that is the most outstanding and probably the most controversial is human chromosome number 2. And I write about this in the new book. What we know, so human chromosome 2, it's the second largest chromosome in our nucleus. It's a big, long chromosome. It has about 1,200 genes, and I won't go through all of them, mm-hmm. but a couple, even one, gene TBR1 is responsible for the neocortex in the human brain. That is where our humanness comes from, empathy, sympathy, compassion. It is where our logic capabilities, where the mirror neurons are that we use for learning. They're all contained in that neocortex. It is where, there's so much happening in the neocortex, and that's just from TBR1. So it's an important chromosome. We wouldn't be here if we didn't have it. And so scientists say, well, where did it come from? Well, now the proceedings from National Academy of Sciences is a volume called Genetics. They know the answer, and they don't like the answer because they say, and this is important, when a scientist makes a discovery they want credit for and they're proud of, they will say, look at what I discovered. When they make a discovery that they may lose their tenure for, or that little controversy around it, they'll say, look at what we discovered. All right. So Proceedings National Academy of Sciences, the summary actually says, we conclude the origin of human chromosome 2 is from the fusion of the telomere to telomere fusion of 2 ancient chromosomes. All right. Telomeres, I know our viewers know, telomeres are on the ends of the chromosome to protect them. When the cell divides, it's a trauma for the cell. And if you can imagine, the chromosomes are pulled apart. And there's a part of the chromosome, every chromosome, that is not going to make it in that pulling apart. And that means there's a potential to lose important DNA. So the way nature, the way we're engineered, takes care of that is we have on the ends of the chromosomes, the telomeres that are repeating sequences that take the hit from pulling apart.
Okay.
So if something is not going to make it, it's not the important DNA, it's the stuff in the telomeres. All right. So they're only on the ends of the chromosome, and that's the point. Chromosome number 2, and I've got pictures of it, and Steve can probably find a photograph. Chromosome number 2 is as big as it is because 2 chromosomes were fused telomere to telomere. Now you've got telomeres on this end, and right in the middle where they shouldn't be. There should be no telomeres in the middle of the chromosome. But not only, that looks like that's my slide.
Which one?
Does it say my name? Is it a big green one?
Oh, you won't. Oh.
No, that's my slide right there on the left hand. It's
on the top left?
Yeah.
Huh.
From a recent program that I did. Where's that come from?
Can you visit the
John
site?
Hawks. Who's John Hawks?
I don't know, but he put that's my white circle that I put up there showing.
Oh, wow.
And
Punch in on that.
And I enlarged it. See that? So what you're seeing,
Yeah.
so first of all, these are chromosomes under a microscope, and they've been dyed. So
Okay.
we can see the chromosomes green. The red or pink, however it comes out on there. I don't have my glasses on, so I'm not seeing.
It's red.
Okay, those are the telomeres, and you can see on all the other ones, telomeres are on the ends right there, and then it's the inside the white circle is the same one that's been enlarged.
Right.
I did that. That's my slide.
Oh, wow.
It's somebody's using in their their paper, showing. Look at where you can see right in the middle. The two red places are right in the middle, but you can actually see the pinch point. It looks unnatural because it's a little skinny place. But here's the thing: not only were the pre-existing chromosomes fused telomere to telomere, but after the fusion, genes were taken away and genes were added and genes were silenced to stabilize the fusion. And it didn't happen slowly, gradually over a long period of time, as evolution would suggest. This happened quickly 200,000 years ago. It's when we showed up. The chromosomes were fused when we showed up.
And what is the significance of those chromosomes of that chromosome 2 being fused?
The significance is it gives us our humanness. If we didn't have chromosome 2, you wouldn't have the neocortex. You wouldn't have sympathy, empathy, compassion. You wouldn't have the ability to self-regulate your own biology. And if that was the only one, you could say maybe it's weird, but maybe it's a fluke. But it wasn't the only one. Chromosome number 7. So as a musician, I'm a musician when I'm not doing this. And I've always, chimpanzees, they share 98% of our DNA. I mean, that's a mind blower, 98%. And so I've always wondered, why can't a chimpanzee sing? You're never going to hear a chimpanzee sing in Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. Or if you ever do, shoot me a text because I want to see that. And the question is why? And the answer is because chromosome 7 was stable in all primates for about 175 million years. Stable. All right. All of a sudden, two little genes, there was this little switch of these two genes that connected our tongue and our jaw and the part of our brain that allows us complex speech and the ability to sing. And guess, just take a wild guess. When do you think that happened?
No idea.
200,000 years ago.
200,000 years ago.
Exactly the same time chromosome 2 was being fused, exactly the time that we appeared on Earth. What are the odds of chromosome 2 being fused and chromosome 7 happening all at the same time? And the odds are astronomically small because the odds of our genome forming the way it formed is 1 in 10 to the 600th.
What is the conventional explanation for this?
Darwin's theory of evolution suggests that we are the product of a long, slow, gradual process over a long period of time through what is called random mutations. Colloquially, we call it lucky biology.
Okay.
It's kind of like you've referred to Goldilocks conditions on Earth. It's the equivalent of Goldilocks. What are the chances that just the right genes, just the right chromosomes came together in just the right time, to give us our humanness? So you see these kinds of mutations, and scientists say, I mean, this isn't my opinion. This is in those technical, it's in there's a paper from Proceedings National Academy of Sciences. The volume is called Genetics. It says this cannot happen under natural circumstances. Something happened 200,000 years ago to give us our humanness, and we appeared. And now here's the mind blower. 200,000 years later, now we can pull the DNA out of the fossilized remains of ancient forms of life. It used to be science fiction. Jurassic Park was based on the science fiction that they pulled the DNA out of dinosaur bones and then they brought the dinosaurs to life. They reconstituted them. To the best of my knowledge, we have not reconstituted any forms of life. But in the basement of the Pentagon, somebody, my chair squeaking, somebody up there is doing it. But what we can do, this is what we can do. We can pull that DNA and build a genome, a printout of that genome. And so now we can compare our genome today to the genome of the forms of life that Darwin's theory of evolution says we descended from, and the DNA says we didn't descend from them. We did not descend from Australopithecus. We didn't descend from Neanderthal. Now, if you do a DNA test for your ancestry, a lot of people will say, well, I've got Neanderthal DNA, and more in Northern Europe. You see that a lot in the UK. And it even proves the point, because we shared the earth with Neanderthal. We actually interbred. They say we probably had boyfriends and girlfriends, Neanderthal boyfriends and girlfriends. Right. We shared the earth with them. We could not have descended from them. So the point is, we don't know where we came from.
So you're saying because we interbred with them, that's why it shows up.
Theory of evolution says that we are the process of this the product of this long, slow, gradual process. Yeah. A lot of people don't know there was a corollary to Darwin's theory, put forth by another scientist at the time, that says that the corollary says nature never over-endows. So the problem is we are all over-endowed, and people love to hear that. But what it means is that an organism will only develop the characteristics it needs when nature puts the demand on the organism for it. So, for example, adaptation. The studies of moths in London during the industrial age, the coal fire plants. The moths had white feathers. They'd be against white buildings, and that would camouflage them from the birds, and the birds couldn't get them. Once the coal fire plant started, all the buildings were covered with soot, and they turned black. And the white moths stood out like a sore thumb, and the birds were picking them off right and left. And they quickly adapted to turn the color of their wings black so that they would blend in with the soot. That's an example of nature giving a capability because the demand is there for survival.
Right.
The problem is, Danny, that we showed up 200,000 years ago with a genome that is light years beyond what we needed for simple survival 200,000 years ago, with capabilities that some of them we're only beginning to understand, extended neural networks that allow us to create heart-brain coherence, for example, that open the door to so many human potentials, the ability to self-regulate our own. We're the only form of life that can, at will, on demand, when we choose, sit down in a moment in time and say, in this moment, I choose to strengthen my immune system. I choose to create resilience to the changes of my life. I choose to create stronger heart rate variability. I choose to create super memory, super cognition. There are over 1,300 positive biological changes that we consciously have the ability. No other form of life can do that. And it's because of what happened 200,000 years ago. So as a scientist, I have to be careful. The evidence strongly suggests intervention of some kind. It doesn't say who or what, but this did not happen naturally. Now, my own personal feelings when I read the ancient texts and I visit all these ancient cultures, what's so interesting, not one of the ancient traditions I've ever been with, the Andes in southern Peru and the shamans in the Yucatan and Nepal and India and the monks and nuns in Tibet, Bedouin in Africa, none of them say that we're the product of a long, slow, gradual process of random mutations. Every single one, bar none, says that we're the product of an intentional act and that we are part of a greater community, whatever we want to call that. So now some people say, now you're talking about aliens, and other people say, well, you're talking about angels and demons, and other people say, well, you're talking about time travelers and advanced civilization. We have different ways of describing, but the science is telling us we're not the product of random, just lucky biology.
Yeah. This is like getting into Sumerian, Zecharia Sitchin land with like the Anunnaki stories.
Yeah, I knew Sitchin, and I toured with him in the 90s.
You knew him?
I knew him. I toured,
oh, wow.
I toured with him before he died. I was very blessed. I toured in a conference setting, I toured with John Mack, Michio Kaku, if you study Michio. Zecharia Sitchin, Ed Mitchell, sixth man to walk on the moon.
Wow, okay.
It was, and I was very blessed. I learned a lot from these. And
did Mitchell ever tell you the truth about the moon landing?
We landed.
We did?
Oh yeah, we definitely landed on the moon. May not have happened exactly the way We definitely have landed, and we continued even after the program was officially ended.
Yeah.
So, we have a commercial. Did you see the movie Contact?
Oh yeah, favorite movies. One of my favorite movies.
There's a line in Contact. It's classic. Where they build this device that has been received from the array, the VLR in Socorro, New Mexico. They get the signal, and then they build the device, and they test it out, and it breaks. And they think everything is lost. And classically, the guy says, "Why build one when you can build two for twice the price?" And they had built another facility in Japan where they were able to go forward. When we built the Cape, it was the same thing. We built the Cape here in Florida. We built a mirror facility on the West Coast. And Vandenberg Air Force Base. And when I was working in the Cold War, installing software, there was a day I had a pass to be on base to install software. And I finished early, and I had a rental car. It's a beautiful base. It's over 60 miles along the coast, rolling green hills. And I said, "Can I explore your base?" And they said, "Yeah." And I said, "Is there any place I shouldn't go?" And they said, "Don't worry. If you go, they're going to let you know." So we didn't have cell phones in those days. We had little Instamatic cameras, and you'd 35 millimeter films, and you'd drop the whole camera off, and they developed the film. So I had one of those cameras with me. And so I'm driving along, and all of a sudden I came up on this hilltop, and I could see the Pacific Ocean, and I got out. And as I looked down from the hill, in front of me, there is an entire launch facility. I mean, it looks like Cape Canaveral, And all of a sudden, up the road, a couple of MPs and Jeeps, they came pretty fast. They came up, and they said, "We're going to have to ask you to leave and confiscate your camera." They said, "We're going to have to take your camera." And I said, "Okay, but can you tell me what I'm looking at?" And he said, "Well, this is Slick 6.
Slick 6.
I said, "What's Slick 6? And he said, "It is the West Coast equivalent of the Cape." And so the Cape, when we do a commercial launch, has to be broadcast commercially. On the West Coast, those are military launches, and they don't have to be. They don't have to be broadcast. So I have not seen the launch. People have told me that we continued with a few launches after what was the end of the Apollo. And it was during the Cold War. I'm not surprised. It was during the Cold War. So, for example, SDI, I worked on a project called SDI, Star Wars Defense Initiative. To test SDI, we had to take those weapons into space, on the space shuttle. Well, once you've got them there, you're not going to bring them home. So they're already deployed. So we've had space weapons, since the Cold War years. And I don't know how much of that facility, I'm not in that industry anymore, so I'm out of touch. This was in the Cold War, and now we're talking, years later. I have no idea what it's being used for now. But the point is that we've had that technology, and you asked me from Ed Mitchell, and he said, and I believe him, that
because there was a whole underground movement after the moon landing, because one of the biggest arguments for the moon landing not being a hoax is that if it was fake, Russia would have or China would have came out and tried to expose that, right? Because they wouldn't want to be humiliated.
No, they wouldn't. And this is what's so interesting. The Cold War was a really interesting, it was a civilized war, not like today, where politically we were at war with Russia, capitalism versus communism. Scientifically, there was a lot of cooperation that was going on. We built the space station with Russia.
Right.
We did that together. What a beautiful thing that we accomplished together. Russia and America at that time were the only two superpowers. Number one, the only powers that had the money and the technology and the capabilities of going to the moon or anywhere else. And they agreed not to talk about what they found on the moon. Now both countries are broke.
Why do you think that is?
Because of what's on the moon.
What do you think's on the moon?
Well, I just want to say now both countries are broke, but there are other countries that are not. India is sending Shiva 1 to the moon, and China, and neither one of those countries agreed to non-disclosure. And China has actually said, and this is, you can't make this up. I keep saying this. China has said when they land their craft on the lunar surface, they will broadcast to the world what they see. So here's the thing. We sent craft looking for microbes and bacterial forms of life. When those craft landed next to archaeological remnants that are over 50,000 years old.
On the moon.
On the moon, on the lunar surface. And when China sends those images back, my sense, and I don't have an inside track any longer, my sense is that we're going to see structures that are there. And I've seen the photographs of the structures. They all the way back to the Clementine missions that were, through Freedom of Information, had to be released in I think it was 1990. They had to be released. And they did, and they pixelated out all of the archaeological structures. And some of them are towers, some of them are long, elongated archaeological structures. So look at the irony. Here we are looking for microbes landing next to temples on the lunar surface.
Yeah.
Now think about what this means. Here we are, we're on a planet on the verge of global war because we believe our differences are so great that we must hurt one another to solve those differences. What would it mean for a space probe from Earth to land on the lunar surface and find these archaeological remnants and find that they're not from aliens from another world, but they're from us from another time? And I think when they send those images and you see the glyphs on those temple walls, we'll know exactly what they say because they will be in our root languages. Cuneiform, Hebrew, Sanskrit, and Arabic are the four root languages that I think you'll see when those come back. Would that be enough for us to look at one another as nations and say, my God, look at the great and beautiful things that we did when we worked together a long time ago in the past? What could we achieve if we came together right now? What could we give to our children? And what could we give to our future if we work together instead of destroying ourselves? Something like that could be the catalyst.
You see, there was something that came out in NASA a couple weeks ago, I think it was maybe even a month ago, where they discovered caves, like deep caverns
I
on
saw
the
that.
moon.
Yeah, they've already found it. That's already, I mean, this stuff, we've had the images. And I think it's one of the reasons commercially we didn't go back, because it causes a lot of problems.
And then what about the dark side? Like there was also something that came out where they were interviewing, I think it was in front of Congress maybe, but they were interviewing the head of NASA and they were asking him about why China is sending rovers out to the dark side of the moon. And he was like, let them do it. We don't care what's back there.
Well, the moon itself is an enigma. Shouldn't be.
Right, of course.
Shouldn't be where it is. The orbit of the moon is unlike any other orbit of any moon around any planet in our solar system. The multiples, the dimensions, the geometry of the moon, the number of moons between Earth and the sun, the number of moons between Earth and the moon, these are very precise. They're integer multiples. This doesn't happen in nature. The other planets in our solar system, moons typically orbit around the equator. Ours is offset just enough to give us the gravity to stabilize our ocean tides. And there is geologic evidence to suggest there was a time where we had oceans and no moon, and the tides were huge. I mean, we're talking like 400-foot waves that were coming in and just decimating land. And there are stories, and there are indigenous traditions and biblical passages that talk about when there was no moon and how things changed when the moon occurred. Now, that's not science. They're stories.
Right.
But the geology does suggest they found evidence of these massive tides at a time when it's believed the moon didn't exist. The question is the moon a natural moon? Is it artificial, or is it a natural moon that was captured in our orbit from a catastrophic event in our solar system? And all big questions, you know, to be answered.
Yeah.
So I think as we go through the congressional hearings and we find out more, we've been in contact. I mean, they're telling us we've got the craft. I don't think anybody cares about that anymore. Nobody's surprised. We have the beings. I don't think anybody's surprised about that. But we have the technology, and that's the problem. Because if we've had technology for 70 years that could have ended wars and eased human suffering, and because of greed, we chose not to reveal that technology, that's the problem. And the moment that technology is revealed, our entire infrastructure of the planet changes. And some people are afraid of that.
Do you think the government has an idea or any kind of understanding on what was going on with what John Mack was talking about, the abduction phenomenon?
There are governments within governments. So there is no one government.
Right.
It's like the United Nations.
Good point.
And I don't want to slam the UN. I have friends working. There are good people in the UN. There's UNs within UNs. Mm-hmm. There are some people there, a lot of younger people that want to do really good things. And there are people there that have been caught up in the hijacking of the UN, that are, I'm not even sure they are aware of the implications of all the things that they're doing. Because there are layers and layers and layers, all happening under the fundamental canopy of the battle between good and evil. And it's not a metaphor. We have to think that way, because anything that steals our human sovereignty, anything that steals our divinity, anything that veils from us our human potential is a form of evil. And now you look at what that means in our lives. What does it mean for our economy? What's it mean for finance? What's it mean for healthcare? What's it mean, all the different ways? What's it mean for technology? And I think that is the yardstick that we have to look at. Is this good for us? Does it promote or deny our humanness?
What other ancient texts or anything that you've looked into, or ancient religious cults have talked about this DNA, this merging of the DNA telomeres, other than like, and how does, I know like the Sumerian, what exactly does it say in the Sumerian tablets and those myths?
Yeah, this is why I want to go back to Sitchin. I think Sitchin, I have a lot of respect for Zecharia Sitchin. Mm-hmm. I think he was a brilliant man. I think he was a good scholar. And he pretty much single-handedly brought to the mainstream. I mean, there have always been linguists behind the scenes, but through his series of books, The 12th Planet was probably the one that people read the most. That brought that to light. I didn't and continue to not agree with his interpretation. His interpretation is that we are here because we were made to be slaves.
Right.
My sense from what I have read and what I understand in the ancient traditions, the people I've talked to, and in the texts, we put them all together, is I think very possibly we have been enslaved at a time in our past. I don't think it's the reason we're created. Yeah, and there's a whole story we can get into, maybe another podcast we can talk about that. So I don't think it's the reason we were created, and he believed that was the reason we were created.
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting, crazy, like sci-fi stories that's out there, is the story of the Anunnaki coming down and creating us to basically be a slave species to terraform the planet, and then they started breeding with us, and they somehow wanted us to mine gold.
Well, that was his interpretation. The
biblical, put it in the atmosphere.
Biblical interpretation is that we were deceived into coming to this world rather than this planet. We were deceived into coming into this realm of matter and three-dimensionality. And that is a form of evil, is the deception of the angels. This is the biblical perspective, that were deceived into coming to the earth realm and captured in matter in three-dimensional bodies and led to believe that there is no other realm. That's another interpretation. And you go back far enough, and all of the traditions that I've seen, they all say that we're the product of an intentional act. You go into the Mayan cultures, and they talk about the multiple iterations of what it took to create the first humans. and how we were created. You go into the Apocrypha and the Gnostic texts, and what's really interesting is they never say God created, and even the original biblical text doesn't say that God created humans. It says Elohim, and Elohim is a plural. So multiple beings created humans, and when you go into the Apocrypha, the texts that were left out by the church, the first time didn't work. Multiple iterations of humans had to be created to hold the power of the soul in the three-dimensional world. So another way of saying that is multiple iterations of DNA had to be tested to hold the sound or the frequency as the antenna to tune us into where we are, multiple iterations. Eve was not the first woman that was created. And I think we probably have biblical scholars that may have talked to Lilith, according to text, was the first female that was created from at the same time that Adam, the first human, the first man, but because they were created at the same time, they were like brother and sister.
Right.
And they weren't drawn to one another. It was when Eve was created, and I wasn't there. I just imagine, I'll channel. Adam said, "Thank God," because this beautiful woman appeared, and he didn't feel that it was his kin, his sibling. He felt, and they were able to be as man and woman.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that all of the entire Bible, there's no evidence of anything in the Bible prior to the Hellenistic period. It all came after the Hellenistic era, which is fascinating. And there's literally during the 3rd century BC and up to the 2nd century BC is when all these biblical characters started to get written about. Like, for example, Moses. There was 24 versions of Moses that were written about in the Hellenistic area that were preserved in the Library of Alexandria. And then after this is when we start to get this biblical narrative to come forth. So it's interesting. And also when it comes to the Dead Sea Scrolls, one of the weird things about that is it's mostly Hebrew, right? There's Hebrew, there's Aramaic, there's Greek.
Greek, right.
But there's no other Hebrew language anywhere in antiquity.
Well, a couple things. First of all, we don't even know where the scrolls came from. They have been attributed to the Essenes, who were a mysterious sect that showed up 500 years before the time of Jesus of Nazareth, who did not even call themselves Essenes. The Egyptians called them therapeutae because they knew how to heal. And Jesus and his mother and her mother were all of the Essene lineage. So he was raised in the lineage that understood healing. The scrolls now, they were found in Qumran, but now they're doing DNA studies, and the parchment that they're on some of it didn't come from the Middle East. So now the question is, were the scrolls created somewhere else and brought to Qumran intact? Or was the parchment created somewhere else, brought to Qumran, and then the scrolls were transcribed from the other documents by the Essenes, and we don't know the answer to that right now.
Right. For
our viewers, the reason the scrolls are so powerful, and again, you can't make this up. This is all 20th century. 46, 47-ish, right around there, the scrolls were found. The oldest records of the Old Testament unedited by the church. 45, the oldest records of the New Testament and the Gnostic texts were found in Egypt, in Nag Hammadi, a little village, they're called the Nag Hammadi Library. And these are the lost Gospels that the church edited during the 4th century. So now we've got the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Thomas, very controversial. Gospel of Sophia, where the women in the Bible, they were there, right. And there were Gnostic women. Some of the female, there's a text called Thunder Perfect Mind. What a powerful text written by a Gnostic woman.
Right.
And I didn't know we were going to talk about this just from memory. It begins, it says, I'm the whore, and I'm the Holy One. I'm the healed and I'm the sick. I represent everything in my life that you are in your life. Why do you stone me to death at your city gates?
Right.
And I can see the church fathers, they're going through the list of, what books do we include and what books, they say, oh, that one's got to go, But so within just a few years of the mid-20th century, we had the oldest records of the Old Testament, the oldest records of the New Testament, and the books that had been edited out. 43 books had been edited by the church in the 4th century. And we had a complete view. And then you begin to see why the church omitted some of the text, because it destroys the narrative that has been preserved through what we call the Bible. Now, I think the Bible is a good book. Mm-hmm. Is it complete? No.
Right. It's not.
Is it selective? Yes.
Right. Yeah, one of the interesting things about the Bible is like the way we look at religion today is vastly different than the way people looked at religion in antiquity, right? We look at some folks like to look at religion as like hard fact and science, right? As if like that's what they live by. I mean, it's one thing to look at it that way, and then it's another thing to look at it as like a tradition or a mythology, something that upholds values for you and your community. Like back then, there was religions weren't exclusive. Like Yahwism, all these other religions were just like people embraced all of them.
Well, and they do. When I'm in the Middle East, we before October 7th of 23, we were leading groups into the Holy Lands that include Israel, include the surrounding areas. And we would go into cities and villages where people of all faiths, they worked in the same restaurants, they lived together, they're neighbors, they're friends. The Arabs observe all the Jewish holidays, the Jews observe all the Arab holidays, which means they get a lot of days off during the year. Their kids play together and they know how to live together. It wasn't a problem for them. Right. A lot of people, when we have this conversation, they will acknowledge the Bible is incomplete, and they interpret that as the divine inspiration that led the church to create the Bible as it is, because this is the way it's supposed to be. This is what they'll say. It was.
Well, it's power and it's greed over centuries.
Yeah, and it's and there are a lot of ways to interpret what that is, but this is one of the overarching themes. And again, this was the war scroll that says we are, until the end of this cycle, that we are in this fundamental battle between good and evil, and that the way that we triumph is by embracing the truth of who we are. That's it. And you can read whatever words you want to read into that, whether you want to talk about biology or you talk about the word divinity.
Right.
So what we're invited to do is live the best version of ourselves.
Was that war scroll? What year was that one discovered? Was
40,
that one?
40,
that was 40. Okay, that was
so
with the
in
first
the
batch.
first in cave number 1. Were the first 7 scrolls that were discovered, and they were some of the most intact. The Isaiah scroll is the one that's the most intact. And if you go to Jerusalem today, just outside of Jerusalem, there's a museum called the Shrine of the Book Museum. Have you been there before?
No.
Oh, this is amazing. So the museum on the outside is a white structure that is made to look like a large version of the top of one of the vases, one of the clay vases. Steve, you can probably bring up Shrine of the Book Museum, if you would, please. And I want to show you something on here.
Cool.
When you go inside, the central part of the inside of the Shrine of the Book, there it is right there. Oh, okay, so there's the outside.
Oh, cool.
So that's the top, and then there's a black obelisk next to it. Can you see if it shows the black obelisk next to it? There,
right, that thing right there.
Lower, yeah, there it is right there. This is the symbol between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. That black obelisk represents the sons of darkness. The white represents the sons of light.
Interesting.
The first 7 scrolls are housed in this museum.
Oh, really?
And then what you're seeing in the center, Steve, you could enlarge that upper left. Oh, now it's right in the middle. Yeah, right there. Thank you. Thank you for the work you're doing behind the scenes. What you're seeing here is this is made to look like a Torah scroll, And what you're seeing on display is the Isaiah scroll, most intact. It's wrapped all the way around. And that whole structure is designed in the event of a nuclear attack. The belief is that the information on the great Isaiah scroll will be the foundation of the new civilization that emerges from the destruction, and it must be preserved at all costs. So this entire structure is designed to drop underground into a vault, and the lid is a concrete and steel lid that comes over it to preserve the great Isaiah scroll in the event of a nuclear attack for the emerging remnant afterward to have all the information they need to build the new civilization. That's how important the Isaiah scroll is believed to be. Isn't that amazing?
That's insane.
Yeah.
And this is where again?
This is in the Shrine of the Book Museum, just outside Jerusalem. And then the other scrolls are in the displays that you see around. But that's the Isaiah scroll that you're seeing right now.
What is the significant? What's in the Isaiah scroll? Have you read it?
Oh, yeah. Well, my Hebrew is not the best. My biblical Hebrew, I've read the English translations of it.
Okay. Do you read any ancient languages?
I am not an expert scholar. I have a strong background in linguistics. And so I have, when languages have been found on some of the archaeological remnants that have never been translated, excuse me, when there are archaeological remnants that are being found now here in Mesoamerica, with, I can't say that it's an alphabet, but their symbols have never been translated. So I am asked to intervene as a linguist and a geologist to see if the stones come from this area, if they came from somewhere else, if the language is a known language, not a known language, is it similar to anything that we see, Egypt, cuneiform, Sanskrit.
And this is in Mesoamerica. You've looked at this stuff?
Mesoamerica.
And what have you found?
It's ongoing.
Okay.
It's ongoing. So this is all and you can see the displays on the edge are other remnants, fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
That's fascinating.
When I was there last in 23, there was a new exhibit inside of here, and the only scroll that has ever been found of the book of Genesis, the original Genesis, was found. And at that time, it was not in good shape. It was still rolled, and they couldn't unroll all of it without damaging it. So we now have technology. They can see what's in it without actually breaking it. But that's there's so much. The scrolls are important for a number of reasons. They're important certainly for the Jewish people in terms of their tradition, but humankind in general, because it's in those first 5 books of the Old Testament, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, that mathematicians and statisticians were able to load them into the computer back in the 90s and run search algorithms called ELS, electronic skip sequences,
right?
Or letter sequences. And what they found when they do that mathematically is beyond random, beyond chance. Statistically, what they're finding is meaningful information encoded in number underlying the letters of only these first 5 books. They tried it with other books and it doesn't work. So there's something very special about those first 5 books, a deeper meaning below the letters that we read on the page. Every ancient alphabet, bar none, has always had a number that represents the letter. The science of that's called gematria, and it's not numerology. Numerology is a loose subset that doesn't follow the rules. In the 2nd century, there was a book, the 32 rabbinical rules were laid out in the 2nd century determining how gematria can be used as a science. And I've spent a lot of time with this. I've got the software, run the algorithms, and you can't fake this stuff. I mean, everything that has happened in the past is encoded into that document. They did the original. Are you familiar with this? Have you had guests talk about this? Okay. So
roughly, vaguely. I'm not an
everything from all the great wars are in there. The countries that entered the wars, the years they entered, who their leaders were, the year the war was over, what year the leaders. I mean, the assassination of Kennedy, election of Obama, Trump. I mean, everything is encoded, and the text says that it will be everything that was, is, or will be, is until the end of time, not the end of the world, but the end of time, is encoded into that text. The end of time
into these texts,
into the first 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy.
When do you think they were written?
Well, this is why the scrolls are so important, because they were the oldest records that had not been edited that were ever discovered of these books. Okay, representations of all of the Old Testament, not complete, but representations of all of them, and you can see where the discrepancies are.
What is the I know we've talked about this a million times, but I can't remember, what is the consensus among scholars of when the Dead Sea Scrolls were originally composed?
I don't know if they
Can you find that, Steve?
If they have a consensus. The scrolls,
or what is the narrative?
The scrolls pushed the dates back by 1,000 years.
Okay, so they say they were written between the 3rd and the 1st. Okay, right. So during or after, they're Hellenistic. At the very earliest, they were Hellenistic. So 300 BC, roughly.
So there's a whole lot we can say about all of that, but I think what's important from all that, and it's another perspective.
Right.
You know, it's another perspective. Why? How could all that information be encoded? And to understand that, I was a senior computer systems designer, and even that I had not been taught about what it appears is happening in here. This is what's called a dynamic array. So we're used to talking about an array of information, linear information. This is a multidimensional. In the computer, you can do it multidimensional. But the thing about this array is every time an event occurs, the entire array rearranges itself to accommodate that event and create a new possible outcome. It's almost as if, in lay terms, it's almost as if we were given, we believe, except that we live in a quantum world, quantum possibilities, many potentials, and that we make the choices that become our reality. It's almost as if we were given a map of potentials, outcomes. So you query, say something like 2024 election Trump. So that's a query. And you put that in, and it will come back, and the array will show you like Trump's name, and it'll show you the 2024 election, and it'll show you assassination attempt. It'll show you the possibilities around that particular query. Doesn't predict what will happen.
Right.
It indicates consequences and outcomes. It's almost as if we were given a map of quantum possibilities so that we can query. But I want to just share the really good news that I've seen from this. During the Cold War, I queried, and I was studying this during the Cold War, right at the end of the Cold War. Cold War was over 89 and 90, and it was in the early 90s. It was the first time that Michael Drosnin wrote the book called The Bible Code. It was the first time with the Hebrew mathematicians. And if you query atomic holocaust, that only comes up twice in the code, and the years for both of those we've already passed. So it suggests that I'm not going to say you won't see a limited exchange. I think you may see a tactical nuke on the battlefield somewhere. But I don't think we're going to see mushroom clouds all over the horizon like they show in the movies. It showed 1983. 83 was the last year, according to the Torah Codes, the Bible Codes, that the word atomic holocaust comes up, and it says, this is called the Torah Codes or the Bible Codes. It's commonly the Bible Codes, but it's actually the Torah that's being first 5 books of the Old Testament. That's
And
being
who was the
queried.
guy who first wrote about this?
Are you familiar with the Bible? I mean, I won't be redundant.
I'm not familiar with what. No,
Okay,
I've never heard of this
so-
before.
Oh, okay. Well, I apologize. Okay. So let's start over. 1990, mid 1990s, a man named Michael Drosnin
Michael Drosnin, that's the name.
wrote a
you
book
said.
called
Okay.
The Bible Codes.
Right.
And it was based on the work of Eli. There's a statistical mathematician who had published in a peer-reviewed journal an article about what are called electronic letter sequences, ELS sequences. And so here's what put it on the map. In the Torah Codes, it said that the prime minister, his name was Yitzhak Rabin, would be assassinated at a certain time on a certain date by a man with a very precise name. They took this information to Yitzhak Rabin and said, look, if you do this speech on this day, 3,000-year-old book says you're gonna be killed. So maybe you want to rethink. And he said, no, if it's in the Torah, it must be true. He went and gave his speech, and he was killed on the day, at the location, at the time of day, and the man's name was Amir, A-M-I-R, and that was all in the Torah Codes, and that's what put it on the map. They said, how could this book have predicted that this was going to happen? So then the statisticians, they said, well, what if he hadn't? What if he had postponed? So they ran the query, that he talked on another day. And the Torah Codes came back and it said assassination delayed, indicating it still would have happened, but it would have happened at maybe another time.
Okay, can you explain to me again how exactly they run these codes? They take.
I'm sorry, I apologize because when you said you'd heard of it, I assumed
No,
that you would already.
I'm familiar with how numbers are associated with the language.
Oh
and
man,
the,
let's
and the
do
words.
this. Let's do this. This
But
is so
I
cool.
wasn't familiar with how they decipher. Are they using a computer to
Yep,
punch
let's
this
do
in?
this. This is so cool.
Okay.
This goes back about 400 years. Rabbis have always said that there are hidden codes in the Torah. They didn't have computers. They tried to figure it out by hand, and it's said by candlelight and lantern lights, and it said that they went crazy trying to do this. So when computers came into vogue in the 90s, those same rabbis said, well, let's do this on a computer. So the idea, this is gematria. Every letter of every ancient alphabet has always had a mysterious number associated with it. We don't know where they came from. They never change, always consistent. If you the study of Kabbalah, people know this. They often use the numbers and letters interchangeably in Kabbalah or Kabbalah. So they took the Torah and converted the letters into their equivalent numeric representations and loaded that into the computers as an array.
Okay.
All right. And then you can tell the computers, beginning with a certain letter, you can do what's called a skip code. You can say, if a skip code is 10, you start with a letter, and then you go 10, and then 10 letters down, and then that's the next code, and then 10 letters down, and that's the next. And what you find is an entire word. So, for example, in the book of Genesis, the first T that you find, and I believe it's a skip code of 10, is O, skip code of 10 R, skip code of 10 H, and it actually says Torah. And they said, okay, well, what else is in there? So that's what makes you crazy doing it by hand. So what they did was a computer, and you can determine it can be a skip code of 50 or a skip code. Actually, the Torah may be a skip code of 50. I may have just done that wrong. I didn't know we were going to talk about this. And I haven't done it for a while. You can determine the skip code, and what it will do, it will search horizontally, it'll search vertically, and it'll search at a diagonal.
Okay.
There you go, right? I was just going to, you're reading my mind. So you can see how these skip codes work.
Okay.
The key is it has to be entered in Hebrew. You have to enter the query in Hebrew. And
Wow.
where the information, so like, for example, the Twin Towers,
Yeah.
was in there, and it said that the planes would hit the Twin Towers. Everything.
And how did they find that? They did this after the fact, obviously, right?
It doesn't predict. It shows relationships once you put them in there. So Harold Gans was a CIA analyst who wanted to debunk this. So he said, let me do my
Harold Gans.
GANS. He said, let me do my experiment. And there was a very famous experiment that he did where they entered the name of, I believe it was 32 rabbis. And they said, let's see if these 32 rabbis are in there. Well, not only were they in there, their birth dates were in there, the date of their death was in there, the location where they lived in the world, their city was in there. It exceeded what the analysts thought. He was going to debunk it. Now he's one of the strongest supporters of what was happening. So it's controversial. A lot of people don't believe it. It's a mystery. How could these things happen? Well, this opens the door to another conversation that we can't have today. But the conversation is if we are living in a simulation. I think you've probably had guests on that have talked about virtual realities and us living in the simulation. Have you had a guest talk about that? If we are living in a virtual simulation, it makes sense that we would have a map of all the potentials within our simulation until the end of the cycle. And that's what is believed that the Torah Codes were given to the people of the earth 3,000 years ago as a map of potentials. When we make a choice, these are what you can expect as the outcome until the end, not the end of the world, but the end of time. The end of time is the end of the cycle. And then we begin a new cycle. And the code says that we are living the end of that cycle, and that's why so many things are converging right now.
Is that where you get the idea, or where does the idea of the 5,000-year cycles come from?
The 5,000-year cycles are, it comes from a lot of ancient tradition based on, on cosmology.
Okay. Does that come from the Mayans or
the Mayans were had one of the best representations, archaeological representations. So 25,000 years is one precession of the equinoxes.
Right.
And that's a lot of time. It's broken down. The Mayan calendar breaks it down into 5 subsections. If you bring up a Mayan calendar, I can show you. Bring up a good Mayan calendar on our screen, please.
Where? 2025 Mayan calendar.
there it is.
Mayan calendar.
Which actually is not even Mayan. It's Aztec, but it's associated.
Right.
Let's see if you do images Mayan calendar.
No, you don't have to do 2025.
Oh.
Yeah, just images Mayan calendar.
Yeah.
There.
Oh, I see.
And let's pick a good anyone.
It's like this circle thing, or
Do the one right there in the center.
Oh, yeah.
On top. All right, now enlarge that. Okay, perfect. So what you're seeing, are you okay if I go into this a little bit?
Of course, yeah.
See the 4 boxes.
Yeah.
Okay, each of those represents one of the 4 previous cycles. Each one is 5,125 years.
Okay.
And then the circle is the 5th. 5 times 5,125 years is approximately the 26,000-year cycle that we're living. Each of those has a glyph that represents how the cycle ended in the past. One was through wind, one was great winds swept the earth and took everything away. One was ice, one was fire, and one was water, the most recent, the Great Flood that we see. Okay, those are 4. The 5th one, the circle in the middle, when I asked the Mayan elders, that's the current cycle. And I asked them, how does this cycle end? What is that glyph? And they say, that is the glyph for movement. And I say, well, what kind of movement? Does that mean like the earth moves or earthquakes? And they said, we don't know. It could be a movement of people, could be a movement of ideas, could be a physical movement that we don't know. They said that the cycle will end with a great movement of some kind. So this is the Mayan representation, but this is only a piece of there is no single artifact that can encapsulate the complexity of the Mayan system of time. This is one piece of it.
Right.
Because they're interlocking cycles that between cosmological ages
and so complex.
Yeah,
man. They were so mathematically advanced. It's almost hard to comprehend.
Yeah, where did they get that?
Right. Where did they get that? Who built the pyramids? There's so many questions.
Another podcast. So what we're looking at is when we look at the Torah Codes, the experts, I mean, the jury is still out. It's very controversial. People that have worked with it, the information is there. There are people that want to debunk it. They say, how could it be? I think, and I don't think we have it all figured out yet because it's only given us partial information. But the information, the relationships it gives us are always right on. Let me just close it out, that piece, with one very beautiful thing. When you see something really dark in the Torah Codes, often nearby in what's called a statistically significant distance, so it's not like way off somewhere, it's close by, is a phrase that says, will you change it? Will you change it? Suggesting that we that we are given the opportunity to determine whether or not these dark things will happen. Will you change it? The choices that we make. And I'm always encouraged when I see that. I think it's no accident that we've seen that. So that's there's a lot more we can talk about with the Torah Codes, but that's a little piece of the big conversation.
Yeah. Have you ever been to Egypt? I'm sure you have.
I led groups there from 1992 until 9/11.
He's done everything.
Every year, at least once a year, sometimes twice a year.
Such a fascinating place that I want to go. I've never been, no.
Well, we should do a field trip.
Yeah, we should.
We should do our big fun podcast field trip.
Yes.
From the road.
Yeah.
That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Christopher Dunn?
I don't get out much. So
he wrote a book I think his first book was in the late 80s maybe, called the Giza Power Plant. I
remember that book. I don't know the name, but I do remember that book.
Yeah, he's an engineer.
Yeah.
He comes from aerospace.
Sure.
And when he first saw the pyramids, he thought, there's no way this is a tomb. He's like,
oh, no.
He reverse engineered it, and he says, this is a functional machine. And he's revamped his theory and added on to it recently. And his newest book is called the Tesla Connection. It's like part 2. Yeah. And his idea is that the Great Pyramid is a solid state electron harvester that harvests electrons deep within the earth. And he's even had like NASA scientists that have backed up his ideas with how those stones in there can help with the electron flow through the earth, and how all those shafts and everything in there, they don't make sense. It's like that thing had to have some sort of crazy function to it.
Well, it is based on such universal principles that it has many functions for that very reason, because of its harmonic relationship to the earth, to the energy on the earth, to the cosmos, encoded into the pyramid, the dimensions. I mean, it's directly in the middle of all the landmass of the planet. You probably know all the stats that go with this. I was there in 1986. I had
oh wow!
I was in Egypt, and they gave permission at that time. They've never done this since. In the Great Pyramid, to take a core sample from one of the casing stones, because the question is, how did they build this thing? How'd they get the stones up 430 feet, And what they found was so controversial. It was published in the engineering journals. Not a lot of people want to talk about it because at that time, a lot of New Age, the harmonic convergence was happening, a lot of New Age stuff. People talking about crystals, lasers, vibration. Yeah. All of which is possible, but the evidence doesn't support any of that. What the evidence shows is that core sample in natural light, the casing stones, the outer stones were removed, mined to be used in buildings and mosques in Cairo, and there's only a couple of them left. They were beautiful, polished marble, white. So what we see today was never meant to be seen by the naked eye. It is sandstone or limestone. Natural limestone, as a geologist, I can tell you, will have laminations because of the way it was deposited. It will have microfossils, tiny microbial forms of life, some kind of shell, something in there. And what they found, the core samples, was none of that. What they found was it was completely homogeneous. there were insects, air bubbles, and human hair that they found in this core sample.
Really?
What they now believe is that they were built, whoever built these used a technology that we're only starting to use today. And it was, they took the natural stone, pulverized it, mixed it with a matrix of an epoxy, and poured the stones in place to get the high tolerances of less than a thousandth of an inch between the stones. And to get the materials up high, they poured the stone and it dried in place. And now they think the same thing happened in Peru at places like Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, the Coricancha, things like that. And it's a very different way of looking at the technology. But if that's the case, it's more advanced.
What stone they took the core samples out of the limestones on the outer edge of it, on the outer parts of it?
You see a picture of the pyramid, you're looking at the interior that was never meant to be seen by the naked eye.
What is this, Steve?
I believe this is what he's referring to.
Oh.
Did they publish it?
Abstract. Study of physical properties such as porosity, density, and mechanical properties such as compressive strength and tensile strength of Egyptian limestone based on experimental investigations. Okay,
There's some light bedtime reading.
Yeah. What is the finding? Go up. No, the very top. There says findings at the top, right where we just were.
Oh, right where we were.
Findings. A strong correlation between porosity and density, and good correlation between uniaxial strength and tensile strength.
But they're
Carried
not-
out results indicated the small porosity results in greater rock strength and vice versa.
Yeah, but it's not talking about how it was built.
Yeah, no, it's not talking
They published this in
there's the core sample.
in the geologic journals, and the geologists had no problem with it. The historians had a huge problem with it, and they also date it now. As a geologist, the Sphinx and the pyramids, the stones are showing erosion. That is called fluvial erosion, which means fast amounts of water over long periods of time, not aeolian erosion, which means wind.
Right.
They had believed that all that erosion was from wind. The Robert Schoch, Boston University, concluded with John Anthony West. I used to know John before he died. We took our groups over at the same time. I would talk for his group, and he would come and talk to my group.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was a lot of fun. He was a good man. Had a hard time in Egypt.
Yeah.
But it was during that time, it's in the early 90s. The only time they've had that kind of running water in Egypt was at the melting of the last ice, which puts this around 12,000 BP before present.
Right.
And that means the Egyptians as we know them today are not the ones that built the Sphinx and the pyramids. And geology, they published this AAPG, American Association of Petroleum Geologists. They published, geologists said, hey, what's the problem? I mean, the data's right there. Of course, it's water. The historians have a horrible time. They said, oh my God, it can't be 12,500 years because that messes up, the whole timeline. And so they're struggling with that today.
Yeah. It's also crazy how all around those pyramids, I've never been there, but I've seen photos. All around there, there's like giant pieces of granite.
We need to take you on a trip.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go. Definitely. I got to wait till my kids get a little older so I can bring them with me. But there's like all these giant granite blocks all around the pyramid that look like they have literal circular saw blade cuts in them. Like you could run a credit card through it. They're so perfect. It looks like someone took a giant circular saw and went zzz right into the side of those pieces of granite.
Tiwanaku on Bolivia, the Bolivian side of Lake Titicaca in Peru. You see, that's very controversial. It's being dated around between 15 and 20,000 BP before present. So the question is, I think what we're finding, all of this is opening the door to a conversation that goes back to the beginning of our conversation. We're not who we've been told, and we're much more than we've been led to believe. Okay, and we're beginning to understand that history. I think what's important now is that just as we're beginning to understand that history, we're being asked to deny our humanness. And within a very brief period of time, we're going to be encouraged to accept technology into our bodies. Chemicals in our blood are definitely RFID chips. They're already being used in Sweden right now in industry. there was an article in Extreme, a guy, I think he had 15 RFID chips
Jesus.
in his body, and he was bragging. He says he's never felt freer.
There's some people that
because he can leave the house with no
God.
billfold, no credit card, no driver's license, and he can go to work. One of his he puts part of his hand and it reads, and he gets into the building. He goes to the bank. People don't understand what that RFID chip is doing to their biology and the thinking underlying that, and the loss of human sovereignty when it comes to that. And these are all things to consider. So I would never tell someone, attempt to convince or persuade anyone or tell them what to do or what not to do. I want people to be aware of what it is that they're giving away. What does it mean to give away your humanness? And is it worth it to you to trade your humanness and your divinity for efficiency and speed of a computer chip? Or to relinquish the complexity of your immune system to the efficiency of a targeted chemical that knows how to go after one contagion at the expense of losing your ability to go after other contagions at other points in your life. Is that worth it to you?
Right.
We're up on the 3 hours, and I'm going to close this. I think what it all comes down to, I just want to acknowledge, first of all, we've covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate your willingness to go there. And I appreciate our viewers. If you're still with us after 3 hours, thank you.
I'm sure they are.
All right. I'm acknowledging that much of what we talk about is a way different way of thinking. And I want to say it is for me as well. In a rural community in northern New Mexico, conservative community, I was never taught to think this way. But I had to be honest with myself. As a scientist, does the science support the story that I was told? And it did not. And so there's a big difference between taking the science and forcing it into a pre-existing idea and allowing the science to lead to the new story that it tells. And I had to make that choice in my life. I lost credibility as a scientist when I did that, and I don't care about that. I would rather be honest with the people of this world that I love and share what I believe the story is saying than preserve some kind of credibility in an academic environment that in my opinion, is obsolete. So I'm just acknowledging that we've covered a lot of ground. What I think it comes down to is love. And that's why I want to leave this, love. Do we love ourselves enough to accept the deep truth of what it means to be human and the responsibility that comes with acknowledging our potentials and our capacities and the choices that we make in our lives in the next 5 years are the answer to that question. It's not a verbal answer. Do we choose to preserve the gift of our humanness, or will we succumb to the indoctrination that tells us life is easier and it's safer if we give our humanness away to technology? Right. And these are choices we all have to make.
Very profound. And I think it makes a lot of sense, especially when you compare the direction that we're going in society right now to the way that societies and cultures evolved in antiquity. And just looking at some of the creations that are beyond our comprehension today that people and our ancestors had, it seems so obvious that they were more connected to themselves and to the earth and not stuck in this hamster wheel of efficiency and progress and chasing the economy and just in that hamster wheel, that money-making hamster wheel that we live in today, our world. So I think it resonates really well.
Well, you think about, you look at the events of the world and they're all designed to keep us spun up and occupied, spun up in fear, which we were never meant to live in 24/7. Fear was a temporary condition to be remedied, not an experience to be preserved. And we're seeing the consequence of that in our health. The inflammation, the disease, the anxiety, the depression, the fear for ourselves and our children. And the way out of all of that is to embrace our divinity.
Yeah.
To be the best version of ourselves. And to do that, we have to have the courage to look beyond what we're being told.
Yeah. Definitely.
Not to discount all of it, but to examine it. Look beyond, think critically. And our young people are being conditioned away from that. They're being told to recite what the authorities have told them rather than to think critically and say, is this true?
Totally. Greg, thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate it.
I want to thank you.
Great to meet you.
It was a pleasure to meet you. Now, this is a good dry run, so now we can
you ready to start the podcast?
Press the button and then press record, and we'll do the whole thing again, right?
That's funny. Tell people that are listening and watching where they can find your book, where they can find your website, get in touch with you, all that stuff.
The new book, the book is called Pure Human, The Hidden Truth of Our Divinity, Power, and Destiny. We have talked about portions of it. There's a lot we didn't talk about. GreggBraden.com, G-R-E-G-G, two G's, B-R-A-D-E-N.com. My mom did that on purpose. Gregory is one G, and I'm not a Gregory. I'm just
nice, just Greg.
Just two G's is Greg. Yeah, wherever books are sold. You can go to Amazon, you go to our website, wherever books are. The book is officially, wow, that's
Look at
my
that
website.
handsome devil.
The book is officially released January 28th, but it's pre-selling very strongly right now.
Okay.
And I think they're going to run out the first print run. So people, if you want one soon, before January 28th.
Amazing.
I haven't seen that. Is this on my website?
Is that your website? That's the Hay House website.
My team did a beautiful job. I've got a beautiful team of very powerful women working behind the scenes to help me support all this.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
If you have 5 minutes, we have a couple questions for our Patreon subscribers.
Yeah.
That we usually do at the end of each podcast.
Can I have a throat lozenge?
Of course.
while I'm doing Patreon?
Yeah. Well, you just spend 30 seconds to a minute answering each question. We'll just rip through a couple of them.
All right.
Which one do you want to do, Steve? Let's not do the ones that are 10 paragraphs.
You can ask anything.
Yeah.
This guy asks about the gene code.
Okay. What this guy says, what is the God code discovered in DNA? Again, we got to keep it simple. Keep it short.
All right.
If it's possible. I know that's a 10-hour question.
No. So as a senior computer systems designer, during the Cold War years, my specialty was pattern recognition software. When the human genome was first published onto a computer network and we could see it for the first time, I immediately noticed that there were patterns in our genome. It's not random. In 2004, I released a book that was the result of 20 years of research of the message, the literal message that's encoded into the first layer of the DNA in every cell of every human body that literally translates into the words God eternal within the body. It literally reads God eternal within the body. And it reads God eternal within the body in the 4 root languages, cuneiform, Sanskrit, Arabic, and Hebrew. And it tells us that when we believe our differences are so great that we must hurt and destroy one another to solve our problems, we need look no further than the 50 trillion cells inside of every human body to remind us of who we are. We are God eternal within the body.
Wow.
It doesn't say who God is or where God came from.
Right.
The God that is spelled out in the DNA of our bodies is the same that you see in those texts that we just talked about.
Amazing.
In the scrolls, the Gnostic texts.
Wow.
All right, so this highlighted part I think is
Okay, I can't see it. You got to undo the highlight. Today I see people becoming genetically weaker due to the amount of poisons they get from food, water, sky, medical, industrial complex. I see people becoming much stupider and becoming dopamine addicts. Do you think that the human race is subconsciously thinning its own herd out in order to become stronger? Is the great leap evolution we've been hearing about actually a massive culling, which will leave only the enlightened and mentally sound humans left on
You're
Earth?
asking my opinion. The answer is absolutely no. It is not something we're doing to ourselves. This is something that is being imposed upon us by powers that are attempting to deceive us and veil the truth of our humanness from us. It is not natural evolution. It is a form of evolution. It is not natural evolution. It's an artificial evolution that is not good for humans. Cutting the CO2 down to 220 parts per million is not good for humans.
Right.
Cooling their temperature is not good for humans. Inciting wars between the superpowers to deplete munitions and human capability is not good for us. Breaking the social bonds that have kept us as a society is not good for us. All of these, when you put them together, are the technology. Replacing biology with technology is not good for us.
Right.
When you put these together, they are all part of a concerted effort to remake the earth and to remake our bodies and the human species into something that no longer serves us as humans. And the question is, who does it serve? That's another conversation.
Yeah, that's the mystery.
It is an expression, a deep expression of evil,
Right.
that is sweeping the earth in a very profound way. It always has. But between now and the year 2030, to remake us and our world and into something that is not good for us.
Right. Something we also covered pretty good on the actual podcast. Okay. This guy says, Gregg has a gift for summarizing. Ask him with all the focus on awakening the masses. Now that we have a huge groups of people engaged, what's next? What does he see on the horizon? Not in a theoretical sense, but in actual, but the actual effects now.
What I think we're seeing in real time is we're seeing the emergence of two parallel societies. We're seeing the emergence of one segment of our population that's all in on everything, on the technology, in the bodies, around them, all the gadgets, all the tools, RFID chips, chemicals, computers, everything. We're seeing another segment of our society that doesn't necessarily know everything that we're speaking about and doesn't necessarily have the vocabulary that we're using, but they recognize that things are happening too fast. It's not good for us. They want to slow down and go back to the basics. And so those are the people I see in my little food co-op that are pulling their kids out of public schools to teach them their own family values. They're growing their own food. They're using medicinal herbs and traditional medicine to heal their bodies. And what I think we'll see, and this can't last long, I think we're going to see these two parallel societies check each other out. And we're going to say who's happier, who's healthier, whose lives are more fulfilled. And the answer to that question is going to be where we emerge. And my sense is there'll probably be a middle ground. I think we'll never let the technology go, but we don't have to incorporate it into our bodies.
Right.
We can allow the technology to serve us rather than enslave us.
Right.
And that's what I see ultimately.
Wow.
And it only happens by us embracing our divinity, the truth of what it means to be human and our human capacities.
That's amazing, man. Thanks again. I appreciate you doing that.
That was the lightning round?
Yeah, that was the lightning round. We're like 3.5 hours in. Thanks to all the Patreons. Love you guys. And that's it. That's all, folks. Good night.
Good night. Take the rest of the day off.
Yeah. Sleep tight.